So, welcome to the 129th Sustainability Salon. That was going to be here on my back porch, but it's going to get a little chilly once the sun goes down. So all of you who have gardens or houseplants outside, think about it might frost tonight, depending on where you are in our hilly topography. And so you might think about harvesting those tomatoes and that basil. Throw yourself a nice caprese salad, or bringing in houseplants that are tender. I spent a lot of time today doing that, and we'll be doing more after the salon. Today we are beginning a 2-salon sequence on air quality in our region, and both today, which is October 8th, and next month on November 12th, we will be talking about air quality, what is challenging air quality here, what pollution sources we have, a big new one that's about to come online in the form of the Shell ethane cracker plant up in Beaver County near the town of Beaver. And looking at kind of big picture what the air quality landscape of our region is. And for that, we have, I think, an ideal person to talk about that, Matt Michalek, who is the director of the Breathe Project, formerly the Breathe Collaborative. Oh, and why don't I make us, we'll do spotlight, and we will add a spotlight of Matt for this introduction. So there's Matt and there's Maren. Anyway, the Breathe started as a Breathe Collaborative under the aegis, well, certainly with the funding of the Heinz endowments, which have been enabled a whole lot of really excellent good works in our region. So Matt has both a great handle on what all the groups are doing, what all the how the groups relate, because Breathe is this wonderful umbrella that a lot of collaboration happens under in a lot of realms, from the Mon Valley and Clairton Coke Works to petrochemical build out in the Shell plant and fracking in general, and energy developments. So Breathe has really led the way on a lot of those things. And I should note that next time we will be hearing from the Patrick Campbell, who is the director of GASP, Group Against Smog and Pollution, which is a 53 or so year old air quality organization. So kind of the grand dame of the local air quality world, I think. And but Patrick himself is fairly new. I think it was just last year that he started. So to our group, he's been working in this realm. Before GASP, he was at Protect PT, which is another wonderful group that a lot of us are working closely with. And we'll also be hearing from a very cool opportunity from a member of the Allegheny County Board of Health, because they are in charge of air quality regulation, and we often complain about how they're not doing things as well as they could and chalking it up to being underfunded. But Caroline Mitchell, who is both, she's an engineer, chemical engineer by training, and also an attorney, has really thought about the ins and outs of that. And in addition to, there's good people there doing the best they can despite being underfunded, there are actually some regulatory framework things that are getting in their way. And so she's going to share some of that with us. And then I'm also thinking that I might have one or two people from affected communities in the Mon Valley, Braddock or Clairton. And I just have been so busy that I haven't reached out to those folks yet, but that I think would round out that salon quite nicely. So so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, and Thank you so much for being here to share all your insights with us. And okay, and then I will take away my spotlight.
Okay, are we good?
We are so good. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Maren. Really appreciate being invited to talk today at your salon. I do wish we could have all been in person to catch up with one another, but I think it's the right choice for us to do it this way, given the fact that it's going to be much cooler and that going indoors is not the smartest thing with large numbers of
Yeah.
people at this point in time. I myself just went this afternoon at 2 o'clock to get both my flu shot and my COVID booster. So I'll probably be sleeping in a little bit tomorrow to once that kicks in. But I think I've got enough gas in the tank to get me to the end of the salon today. But
Massage those injection sites. It's supposed to make it hurt less.
yeah, well, they do one in each arm. So yeah.
Both ingestion sites. I did it on Monday, so I'm right there with you. And also another silver lining to the cloud of not being together is that being on Zoom, we can have slides, and there's some very powerful imagery that we'll be looking at. And so that was one of the reasons, in addition to just it's chilly. As you can see, I'm happily sitting out here on my porch for now. But over the summer, I had several nice in-person outdoor salons, but you can't really do slides because it's just too bright. So we can now enjoy all the wonderful graphics before us. So thanks.
Thanks. So I appreciate it, and I want to thank everyone who's coming to this on a nice fall Saturday afternoon. I know many of you, most of you, many of you well, and work with a large number of you. So people know that I am not shy about speaking out on different matters. What I want to do is, and so this conversation can go in lots of different directions. What I want to say is, sometimes productive conversations begin just by getting the facts laid out there. And so that's my approach, at least to this part of the talk. Talk about what can we really say about our region's air quality, to ground the conversation. If there's time, we can talk about build out and what potential impacts might be coming to our airshed, and leadership. So we can have a conversation about the current default switch leadership vision, and why some of us think that's a problematic thing, and what to do about it. So that's really what I'm going to try to do. I'll keep this to probably 20 to 30 minutes, but we can switch it up. And if people have questions or need something clarified, please do use the chat, and I will do my best to respond in real time. So thank you. So I'm with the Breathe Project. We are a program of the Community Foundation for the Alleghenies. We've become publicly facing as of 2018. Prior to that, we lived within the Heinz Endowments, launched in 2011, and ran into some issues with trying to do just the big tent approach to air quality, involving all sectors engaged with it. And so from 2013 to 2018, it mostly was public health groups and environmental groups meeting. And since 2018, we relaunched it and rebranded it. It is still centered mainly on public health and air quality, and advocacy. However, we do have growing partnerships, especially with local community organizations, and also some for-profit ventures, increasingly aligning with the work of the Breathe Network. Right now, we're a network of about 70 organizations. Like I said, it's local community groups, especially people who live in impacted communities. It's public health researchers, School of Public Health at University of Pittsburgh. It's um, uh, air quality specialists like the Center for Atmospheric and Particle Studies at Carnegie Mellon, and technology related air quality groups like the CREATE Lab. It's also a whole host of environmental groups that are working together, many of which have legal capability to be brought to bear or policy-making capability. And so, you know, we are all working together to improve air quality in southwestern Pennsylvania. And so the question you might ask is, why does it take that number of groups working together? And it is because we still have a serious air quality problem, and adding to our airshed burden will only make things worse. And as Jamil Bey of Urban Kindness pointed out, our air quality problem is also simultaneously a political problem. And that's why it requires the mustering of all of our groups and our collective effort to change things for the better. Okay, so let's just start with some facts. So every year, you can look at air quality from a number of different ways using a number of different methodologies. One that tends to gather a lot of attention every year is in March, when the American Lung Association releases their annual report on air quality. And the air quality report for 2022 shows that we still get F grades for the 24-hour particle pollution and an F grade for ozone. This is the first time in known memory that our region has been given a passing grade for particle pollution annual average. A lot of that, however, needs to be examined with an asterisk next to it, because a lot of the data there involves reductions in emissions from industrial shutdown and people driving less during the pandemic. Another way you can look at this is the air quality index and see how many days are rated good or not good out of a given year. And so if you go back, you know, several years, we're ranging between a half and 2/3 of the time in Allegheny County, our air is rated as not good. And in fact, in the first 281 days of, which includes today, in our region, 135 of them have been rated not good. And this is a chart that the CREATE Lab has available that tracks how many our region appears either as in the top 10 worst air quality in the country or number 1 worst air quality in the country of all monitored areas. And you can see under the Liberty Claritin monitor this year, there were 26 days out of 281 days that the Liberty Claritin monitor appeared as the number 1 worst air monitor for at least some portion of the day. And so that's just under 10% of the time. So that's almost 1 out of every 10 days. Liberty Claritin ranks at least a portion of the day as the number 1 worst air quality area in the country. And if you are counting top 10 days, so there are 92 times out of 281 days, that's about 1/3 of the time Liberty Claritin air quality is in the top 10 worst air quality areas in the country. Pittsburgh is about half that number of times, 49 times. That Pittsburgh monitor is our monitors like the Parkway monitor nearby. So we still have problems when we compare ourselves with how the rest of the country is doing. And this next set of charts shows all of the air monitors that have been put into operation starting in the year 2000, marching up to the present time, and comparing whether or not that monitor is meeting the annual average standard set in 2012 of 12 micrograms per cubic meter. And you can see back in the year 2000, a large portion of the country, all the red dots, we're not meeting that 12 microgram per cubic meter standard. And I'm just going to march forward in time in 3-year increments. So this is now 2006 to 2008. And you can see some part of the country started shifting. Now, if we go up, this is 2007 to 2009, 2010 to 2012. So this is actually the date when the 2012 standard was formally adopted by EPA. And you can see that when the standard itself was adopted, a good portion of the country was either in attainment of that standard or on the verge of being in attainment of that standard. But the Pittsburgh area, this area around here, we were not at that time. And so let's just keep marching forward. This is up through the year 2015. Now we get up through 2018, and you can see the bulk of the country meeting the 2012 standard by the end of the year 2018, right before the pandemic. But you can see, the Liberty Clairton area still not meeting that standard set in 2012. So first of all, these series of charts show us that the Clean Air Act actually works, that it does put a policy framework in place that allows pollution levels to be improved over time, because it sets guidelines for states that then can put in permits in their models for how to ramp down air pollution. It also, however, also shows that we're coming in. If this were a race, our region would be like coming in last place when it comes to air quality. Okay, now if you look at greater Pittsburgh as a whole, the core-based statistical area, which reaches all the way over into Steubenville, Ohio, and includes part of West Virginia, excuse me, and you look at how many days appear in the air quality index in the different categories of green, which is healthy for everyone, yellow is considered moderate, orange is unhealthy for sensitive groups, and red is unhealthy for everyone. You can see that our area really hasn't changed very much going back to the year 2018. 2020 was a dip in pollution levels. We have subsequently gotten data that shows, for example, the Clairton Coke Works greatly trimming its production in 2020, as well as the Edgar Thomson Works. And so you see a bump up in the number of green air quality days. But by the year 2021, we're back on the downslide again. And we can, for Allegheny County, it mirrors that same pattern. Allegheny County, we're almost, back to where we were in 2018. Now, there are weather fluctuations and temperature inversion fluctuations that influence this data, but that's why you look at it over a multiple year period of time and try to assess the extent that those factors come into play. Basically, 2019 and 2018, these years actually compared with 2017 are actually cleaner because of heavy rainfall during those years. 2020 was on the higher end of rainfall, but not as much as 2018 and 2019. And 2021 kind of shaped up as being more or less like an average type year. So you can see, we're not getting clean enough fast enough. And so you can look at data for the year 2022. So this is all the charts I've showed you before are data that has been verified by the EPA, and any problematic data has been filtered out. The EPA usually takes like January through May to go over the prior year's data to quality check it. You can still download data for the current year. It hasn't been quality checked yet, but this is what a scatter plot looks like for the first 281 days of 2022. And you can see out of the 281 days, we have 133 plus 4 or 137 days that the air quality is not good, whereas 146 days, the air is clean. So it's still along the line of the long-term average of about half the time our air is not good. Now we have 8 monitors around Allegheny County, And if you compute the average air quality of those 8 monitors and compare that average to the average of other cities around the country, this is what the picture looks like. And this is something you can find on our Breathe Project website called the Breathe Meter. And so the Pittsburgh airshed is now ranked at about the 27th percentile out of all areas. And you can see on this map, New York is just about at the midway point, the 50th percentile, whereas Seattle and Boston is much higher. What we can say, and this is based off of 2021 data, and what we can say is Pittsburgh has, that average has improved in the year 2021 compared with prior years. This is something that we're seeing largely happening in northeastern cities where, because of the Clean Power Plan, where so many old coal-fired power plants have been closing, air quality in the Northeast has generally been getting better. At the same time, wildfires have gotten much worse on the West Coast, in California, Oregon, and Washington. And so, whereas a few years ago Pittsburgh was ranked at the 8th percentile, part of that improvement in rank is, from background pollution from reduced coal-fired power plants, but it is also some other places that weren't ranked very low are finding themselves in some of the worst areas because of wildfires changing the ranking. But even this representation is a little misleading, because what I've now just added to this map are the 8 monitors that are around Allegheny County. And you can see there are a fair number of those monitors that are still among the worst in the country. The Liberty Clairton monitor is still in the worst 3% of monitors in the US. The North Braddock monitor is still in the worst 5% of monitors in the US. So you can see there are 5 monitors that are really, not doing very well. And then there are a few, like the monitor in North Park, that is the best air quality, that is showing a much better air profile. And so on the average, that's where you get the 27%. And only the least polluted monitor in North Park would meet the annual level advocated by environmental groups for what a new standard should be of 8 micrograms per cubic meter. So in 2020, the EPA called for public comment about whether the standard should be improved. And many environmental groups, including the Breathe Project, weighed in with very, very well thought out public health research that showed that really there's no lower bound to harms from particle pollution exposure. The lowest thresholds that have been measured are around the 5 or 6 microgram per cubic meter level. And there's still harms that are demonstrated at that level, but there's much more consensus around the 8 or 9 microgram per cubic meter in terms of public health research studies. And so we advocated for that being the level set in 2020. And at the time, Andrew Wheeler, who was the EPA administrator, more or less by fiat, just negated all of that research and expertise and kept the standard at 12 micrograms per cubic meter. This standard is going to be, we anticipate it coming out for public comment again by the end of this year. And so we will be pursuing once again, trying to set an 8 microgram per cubic meter standard. By the way, the World Health Organization has already set its standard at 5 micrograms per cubic meter. And so this is just another chart that, the last one I showed visually, this is based on the annual average measurements of our 8 monitors, which percentile they rank in the United States. And I just want to note here that none of the monitors meet what the World Health Organization sets as its standard. And we have, like I said, that Liberty monitor in the worst 10%, and then the next 3, North Braddock, Parkway, and I'm trying to think what the other one is right now. It might be the Avalon monitor in the worst 20%. You can also look at it at a 24-hour average instead of an annual average. And so if you look at it in those terms, our 8 monitors show, one in the worst 20%, one in the worst 30%, one in the worst 40%, and so on throughout the county. But none of them would meet the World Health Organization standard for 15 micrograms per cubic meter on a daily average. Um, Ozone, so ozone um, is barely in attainment, um, but just squeaked in 2021. So there were 3 monitors in Allegheny County, 2 in the worst 40%, 1 in the worst 50%, but the worst monitor just barely squeaked in to meet the ozone standard. So we're walking right on the edge of that standard. And then in terms of sulfur dioxide, 2 in the worst 10%, 2 in the worst 40%, all of them met the 1 hour standard of 75 parts per billion set by the EPA. But once again, this was something that was quite close again. One of the monitors was right on the edge of not meeting the standard. Now, in terms of hydrogen sulfide, this is a state standard. This is not one that the EPA sets. The ACHD's collected data over the last 22 years, and our region violates that 24-hour hydrogen sulfide standard on average 50 times a year over the last 20 years. And in fact, in 2021, there were 54 violations of that hydrogen sulfide standard. That's why, for people who live in the East End, why the air smells like rotten eggs frequently. It's because of these emissions. And they're very, very much traced to the Clairton Coke Works as the source of that. And one other thing I just wanted to point out is this week alone, I believe it was 2 days ago, Allegheny County violated the 1 hour hydrogen sulfide standard for the first time since 2015. We believe what happened there was they were restarting some parts of the Clairton Coke Works, which they had shut down to try to present a good face to all the energy ministers that came to our region by not having bad air quality days when the ministers were in town. If you want to look in terms of population risk, who is vulnerable to this air pollution, you can see in Allegheny County, we've got 1.2 million people, children under 18, over 225,000 people there, 239,000 or 240,000 adults over the age of 65, 26,000 people with pediatric asthma, over 100,000 people with adult asthma, over 100,000 with COPD, people with lung cancer, cardiovascular disease, people who are pregnant, people who are vulnerable because of poverty vulnerability, and 270,000 people of color exposed to these pollution levels. Now, long-term exposure from air pollution, especially particles, has the effect of affecting people over the long haul, increasing cancer risk. So Allegheny County ranks among the worst 1% of counties nationwide for cancer risk from industrial point source pollution. And Allegheny County residents' cancer risk level is over 6 times higher than the national average for people living in other urban counties. And then cancer rates, these are the actual data. Cancer rates in southwestern Pennsylvania are 50% higher than the rest of the United States. If you look at exposure from hazardous air pollution and diesel particulate matter, Allegheny County is in the worst 4% of counties nationwide. Most of the point source cancer risk in Allegheny County is attributable to coke oven emissions, 90% of it. And it's traceable, 90% of those emissions are traceable just to one facility. That's the Clairton Coke Works facility. So that's one of the reasons why when we do organizing work, that the Clairton facility is so prominent in terms of advocacy work in Allegheny County. We also have to pay attention to vehicle emissions. They're problematic. We're ranked in the worst 7% of all counties nationally for cancer risk from vehicle emissions. And these are maps from the National Air Toxics Assessment Database. The latest data is 2017 that's available, and you can see where the cancer risk most elevated areas are. You can see a good portion of the east end of Allegheny County, but especially in the Mon Valley, especially adjacent to the Clairton Coke Works and the Edgar Thomson Steel Works. Now, some folks may be, interested in Beaver County statistics too, because of the potential to add more air burden on people there with the coming online of the Shell cracker plant and the build out of infrastructure. So you can see these are the population exposure risks for people who live in Beaver County. And then this is what the cancer risk map looks like. You can see it is also traveling along the Ohio River Valley, which is where we expect most of the pollution from the Shell plant to settle in, especially overnight. So these are just the facts that I have that back up my statement that we still have a serious air quality problem, and adding to our airshed burden will only make things worse. And what I would like to do now, I probably will pause here because it's been about 30 minutes. There are still other chapters to this conversation we can have, especially about the vision for the future. And so, but I'm happy to save that for later to make sure that both Mark and Cliff have a chance to, present to people. And Maren, I don't know if you want to do any quick questions now or save them until after everyone.
We could certainly start in with some questions and, take a pause. I think, if you guys can do interleaved presentations, I think that's sort of the optimum. I don't usually ask that of my presenters, but if you're game, that would be terrific. I don't think it's been as many as 30 minutes because we got a little late start because of all my pitches, but if this is a good stopping point.
A good stopping point. Yeah, I have lots more, but I don't want to PowerPoint people to death. So
yeah, doing some in and out there is good. Okay, so one reflection that I just had while I was listening to you saying so many people with COPD and so many kids with pediatric asthma and all of these different conditions, it has to be remembered that those are not just people who are more vulnerable to air pollution events and chronic air pollution, but those are people whose chronic conditions that really mess up their lives are almost certainly caused by the air pollution problems that they've been living. So I just wanted to
most certainly. Yeah, most certainly.
Because, and that does make them that much more vulnerable, but the life of someone with those illnesses is so different and so much lower quality of life than someone without it. It's just so unfair, and that's what environmental justice is all about, and we talk about that a lot.
Yeah, there are some other pieces to this. So the new updated EJ Screen tool by EPA can actually show, Maren, exactly what you're saying visually on maps. So, I'm hoping in future talks to bring more of that forward. It just takes some sitting down with that tool to generate those maps. But it's very, very impactful to use that EJ Screen tool, and it brings it home, in a hard-hitting way.
Yeah, I've used it a little even in our gardening program because we're looking for vulnerable people to help grow their own food because they're also low income and in food deserts and all that kind of thing. There's not a whole lot of questions. I had one, you meant the Pittsburgh CBSA. Is that a sort of a watershed related thing? Because that would be unusually
It's
possible for the
it's an airshed defined region, actually. It includes eastern Ohio and parts of the Panhandle of West Virginia, and it has to do with especially ozone transport. How the EPA defines um, these areas under the Clean Air Act of attainment and non-attainment. It has more to do with where the population is located and where the industrial areas are located.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. A
And,
good-
and I do want to respond. I see you in the chat talked about the pandemic effect and effect on air quality. I think at the time that was what people were able to discern. However, one of the things that we, in this most recent public comment for our area being redesignated, it's an application for our area to be redesignated as an attainment region, remove the non-attainment status. And through right to know requests, we were able to find that actually the Clairton Coke Works and the Edgar Thomson Works shut down quite a bit. That their industrial productivity was much lower and does correspond with the drop in the air quality levels, especially in the year 2020.
Because of Claire,
So yeah, and so that probably needs to be looked at again from more sides.
and they may,
I don't think what was reported was wrong. I just think it also depends on what data you're looking at to make those assessments.
well, maybe I should touch base with the folks who did that research at Carnegie Mellon and see if they'd like to offer an update, because I doubt that they just put it away after
Right.
this paper. It is notable that if Clairton reduces its output, and potentially with people, a lot of activity further downstream may have been reduced or suspended, like building buildings or bridges that use steel. Probably a lot of things were left till later because they
Right.
didn't want to endanger their workers. There is so maybe there was less call for steel, thus less call for coke upstream. And when something that not everybody realizes, that when the amount of pollution that spews out of the coke ovens when they do a push, so they push piled coal from one side of this giant slot to the other end, and when they open it up, the shorter amount of time it baked, the more stuff is still in the cavity. And so one of the measures in the episodic air regulations that Patrick may talk about next month, where industrial facilities are asked to, well, have been asked to come up with a plan to reduce their emissions by whatever means necessary when there's going to be an inversion. And they, the easiest way for Clairton to do that, they can't actually turn off their ovens because everything would crack when they cool. They have to run forever, but until they're decommissioned. But they can extend the coking time, which reduces their output. They make less coke because it's the same pile of coal in there, but the longer it bakes, so going from 15 hours to 20 hours, it won't pollute quite as much when it is opened. There are a couple of points of information. One of our attendees actually has COPD and can testify that it changes your life in ways that are often surprising. Another point of information for anybody getting their flu shots and Omicron boosters, Clifford recommends the chicken flap, which I presume he means this. That also helps. I was told massage the injection site, so I was doing a lot of this week. So anyway, there aren't other questions really in the chat. Does anybody else have questions or comments for Matthew's stuff so far? Or shall we, do you want to continue then, Matt, or do you want to turn it over to Clifford?
Well, I'm happy to do whatever works best for this group. I do have other things I can keep talking about, but I also, having some variety of speakers might also make some sense. But it depends on how much time each of them want to take, So the next things I would talk about has to do with sort of like vision and leadership related to air quality and policy going forward. So if folks would want to hear that, I'm happy to switch to that part of the talk, but I also can put that on pause for folks to hear from others. So whatever suits people the
I
best.
think switching it up is will make it that much more pleasant since that's sort of a different topic. But thank you for giving us the lay of the land in southwestern Pennsylvania air, because we're all breathing it. Well, most of us. I think at least one person is here from Massachusetts. So I will now bring in Dr. Clifford Lau, who is a chemist, studied a PhD in synthetic organic chemistry from the Ohio State University, I presume, and was an industrial chemist for many years for Polaroid and then for Bayer Materials Science. And he's got patents, he's got journal articles. He's a real live chemist. Not that I don't have a real live chemist that lives here, although he's not here at the moment. But lately, Clifford has been, in addition to doing some continuing to do teaching at several local universities, he is doing a lot of work in support of the local activist community, because he can wrap his head around the chemistry of what's going on inside the Shell cracker plant. And so he's been very involved in BC-MAC, the Beaver Marcellus Awareness Coalition, community now, was coalition. Beaver County Marcellus Awareness Community, BC-MAC, the Clean Air Council, and Climate Reality Project. So, and he has some good new information and imagery of the cracker plant to help us all understand it a little better, because it's big and it's here now and it's about to start up. And even though it hasn't started up, it's already putting crap in the air. Oh, so take it away, Cliff. I'll remove me and leave us with you.
Okay, well, thank you, Maren, for that. And Matt, you did a great introduction to the overall air quality in the Southwest Pennsylvania region. And one of the things that I got started with this and teaching environmental science was realizing, as you said, we're just on the cups. We are somewhat improving depending on how you work the numbers, but that we were basically for the longest time a non-attainable zone for 2.5 micron particles and for ozone. And when I heard they were going to put a big petrochemical refinery plant in Beaver County and stuff, I said, well, how can you add something like that to an already burdened airshed? So that's what started me to get involved here. So we've been having a group called Eyes on Shell, and I'd like to show you some of the things that we've been observing up in Beaver County and what the plant is already doing as it comes up. So let me see if I can share my slides here. It says I'm disabled for sharing, Maren.
I made you a co-host, didn't I? Let me double check. Huh, it didn't take somehow. I will do it again. There you go. You should be able to now.
Mhm.
Sorry, I didn't double check.
All right, so we have Eyes on Shell. We're looking at keeping, as the word says, to I had many times when Shell had community meetings, they would finally come to the point where they would say, well, if you see us doing something wrong, let us know. And so taking that to heart and to watch them and see what they're doing. So we've got the part of the Eyes on Shell. We call it the Watchdog team meetings once a month. And we look at and get people. We have about 60 or so people in the group that are making observations throughout the month, and we compile that and look at that, and whether we put in DEP complaints or EPA complaints or file for Right to Know or stuff, to try to get a better idea of what's actually going on. I know that this is a air quality one, but I just wanted to start off here. We've got a current event going on for water pollution. They've been having a foam. One of our Eyes on Shell people noted it back on July 21st. You can see the foam there and coming down outfall number 1. And then on September 6th, I was out there with some of the Three River water keepers, and we actually gathered a sample of the foam, and we're having that water and that foam analyzed. Shell seems to be that they suck the foam up and then they're not worried anymore about what's going on there. But as I give a analogy, is that if you have your sink full of soapy water and you take off the soap or the suds on the top, are you still going to drink that water in your sink? No, because the surfactant and stuff is still in there. So part of bringing this up, it's still, we just the other day got a notification from the NRC that as of September 27th, there was a dispersion of a white liquid substance into the Ohio River being attributed to the cracker plant. So even though if you read the Shell Facebook page and they say that this was just a one-time thing and they fixed it, don't worry about it, it's just a substance, it appears that it's still going. So we're working on investigating this, getting information from the DEP and taking water samples, as I said. So Shell has given us a lot to work on. So, but that just to show you that things can have a long lifespan. It's always started on the 21st and it's still going. So when we talk about air quality, as I said, that adding such a large plant to this already strained airshed, and even while they are still under construction, they gave us a chance to practice our data collection and reporting to the DEP. Back on September 28th, almost a year ago, they had what we call the maple syrup smell. And it was reported, and actually the DEP did respond and investigate it and found out that you're not allowed to have malodors come over the fence of a plant and affect the lifestyle of the people, quality of life of the people outside. And they ruled that this maple syrup smell, even though it was, you would say maple syrup doesn't smell that bad, not like hydrogen sulfide, but it's still not the normal smell you want. It turned out to be that they were in the process of doing some corrosion inhibiting work, putting chemicals on to prevent corrosion of their cooling towers. And part of that process, they add a little sodium hypochlorite, which is bleach, and supposedly their sodium hypochlorite pump went awry and put too much in and ended up chlorinating it, a triazole material, and that's what gave the maple syrup smell. Now, it lasted for about 5 days. And like I said, the DEP did investigate it. So that's good. They gave them a minor fine. I forget exactly the amount of money. I think it was maybe 9,000 or so. So that's nothing. But this started us off in the one thing that what we're going to talk about, this eyes on shell, is that the DEP never collected a sample. Now, usually they say they can't do that because usually smells don't last for more than a couple of hours or a day. And by the time they initiate their investigation, the smell is usually gone. Well, this was one instance, like I said, it lasted for 5 days. And so a lot of good scientific data was missed by not taking an air sample. So that's what the Eyes on Shell and BC MAC, we've initiated. You'll see more detail as I go on, what we call an episodic response team, that we are kind of filling in the gap what the DEP doesn't do, or the EPA, and actually take samples, have citizens trained in being able to take air samples or air readings in a variety of different ways in order to get the data that we need to actually show what's going on. And I found this recently. I thought this is from our good friends from the Marcellus Drilling News, and they have this article they published that they kind of say, well, imagine Hershey getting fined for smelling like chocolate or Starbucks like coffee, but I don't think the cracker plant is in line to be making maple syrup. So their kind of comments here aren't well taken. So here's what the plant currently looks like. Shell's Facebook page here says that they're in the process of starting up, and they will be in the process of starting up, starting to fire up some of their flares, and their stacks and things will start. And we've definitely observed that happening. So here's a shot that one of our Eyes on Shell people took, saying that, is this what's going to be the new normal? And asking what's going on here. So that's what we're involved with looking at. This is called the orange sky effect. Shell claims that it has to do with the reflection of the flares into the clouds. However, I see more white lights there than I see orange colored lights. So we're investigating that to see if that's the truth. So again, our Eyes on Shell people took this picture and also reported the data was on September 14th at about 8:46 p.m. And so we take measurements and things. Here's show you how far away. Here's someone that is not directly living in the line of sight of the plant. And again, they're asking, is this the new normal, that they still see the orange sky? So here's where we've gone out and investigated. We had this on September 16th. I was there. I took this picture from the Interstate Chemical facility and noted the temperature and that the wind was coming from the northwest at 0 miles an hour. So you can see that we call these the soup can flares. They're ground flares, and they're actually burning. And so you see some yellow light coming out of them. The other one there is the high pressure flare. They are steam assisted, and so they they actually get better burning of the exhaust gas if they mix it up with water. It seems counterintuitive, but it does help mix the air and the gas if you actually have a little water in there. So that's just bleeding the steam off of the, but part of this, we were evaluating, which I'll show you, buckets to take air samples, but also using handheld detectors called PIDs, photoionization detectors. And with that I can measure VOCs, volatile organic components, and I can also measure, for this particular one, hydrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and also ethane. So we want to then look at what the cloud cover is and what the inversion that would lead to this orange sky. So here's where we've taken some air samples for a baseline. We've used some Suma canisters. They're kind of expensive and hard to maintain. So we've been using, you see here, we'll talk about from the Louisiana Bucket Brigade. We have the buckets, and we'll have the buckets among about 5 or so citizens of Beaver County, so ready to take samples whenever something is smelled, or if we've got a particular large flare or what going on. But this is where we're taking readings with a Suma canister and also a bucket, and we've got those results and comparing them. This is part of our, as I call, episodic response team, or our bucketeers. So here's a closer look. Very simple device. It's basically a Tylon bag inside of a bucket. You use that pump device to suck the air out, and it sucks the air from the outside into the bucket, and you have a sample. You close off the valve, and this is actually an EPA approved procedure that they will accept the results of this in court cases and whatever, as well as long as you have a chain of custody, as well as a Suma canister. And we had those bags and Suma canisters analyzed for what's a TO15, which is a broad spectrum of all kinds of VOCs. And this goes on for page after page for each of the samples, but just wanted to show you what kind of numbers and the variety of different chemicals that they test for. So the other device that I showed you that measured our 0.6 ppms of VOCs, we're evaluating 2 different handheld monitors. One's called the Multi-Ray Plus, and one's called the MX6, one made by Industrial Scientific, the other one made by Honeywell. And so we're putting the data together of which one we want to use and how we can best apply it. We're Clean Air Council has agreed to purchase these. They're quite expensive, but they actually can give you a reading of the actual ppms of the amount of organic materials that are in the air. And the picture to the left is we were at tabling at the Big Knob Fair, and I'm showing a gentleman the bucket there to demonstrate. And then the bucket takes at least a week to get analyzed, but we can get a reading right away using the handheld PID there. We're also in the process of getting these called colorimetric gas dispersion tubes, and they are individual tubes that have chemicals in them that allows you to detect certain chemicals. So you have a tube for benzene, butadiene, formaldehyde, and hydrocarbons. And you pull with this pump a certain amount. They're not real precise, but they are particular for those compounds, and they give you a relative reading for how much of each of these particular, you have to have a different tube for each of those chemicals. So here there's 8 points of emission in the Shell Plastics plant. You've got the cogen stacks, the cracker. You've got two diesel engines that are used to drive the fire pump stacks. You've got the totally enclosed ground flares. Those were the two what we're calling soup cans. You'll see in a moment, I'll show you pictures to try to help out with the eyes on Shell people to be able not to remember these complicated names, but we've tried to give them kind of simple names that are easy to remember so that when they report seeing something, they just don't say they see a flare, but they can tell us exactly what flare they had by using some of the common names that we've come up with. The last one there, the multi-point ground flare, we call that the stovetop flare. And show you all the stuff we collected. This is what the emissions that right now the Shell plant has. That's during the construction, some of the things changed. And so some of the emissions have gone up a little bit, some of the emissions have gone down, but they are going to be a major emitter of air pollution for the Ohio River Valley. So here's some work we've been doing with the CREATE Lab from Carnegie Mellon. We've got some aerial photographs here, and you can see we've identified the soup can flares. We call the high pressure flare is the emergency one. There's the spent caustic one we're calling the West Pentel flare. And then where the actual ethylene cracking, where they take the ethane and dehydrogenate it, make it into ethylene. We call the furnaces there called the Seven Sisters. And then here we have the ethylene purification area, then the cogen area where they generate the electricity with the steam. That's the Three Little Sisters. And then we have the stovetop, that's that multi-point ground flare. And then we call the continuous vent thermal oxidizer, that's our East Pencil flare stack. So hopefully that helps people out with trying to identify where they're seeing the fire come from. And then the diesel pipe stacks are where the big blue arrow is pointing to. And then also of interest is this is where the Falcon pipeline comes into the plant. It's called the Monaca Metering Station. And there's some request to the DEP that they want to put a flare and a pigging station there to be able to clean the pipeline coming in from the Falcon. So overall, this is a nice aerial, gives you the total view of the footprint of the plant. And Shell is part of an agreement with EHP or the Health Environmental Integrity Project or something. Or EIP, right? And
Yes, that's
the Clean Air Council, that they have fence line monitoring agreement. And this is what their map looks like, where they have their monitors. They have both what they call passive, which is up and running, and I'll show you that. And then they also have a continuous one where they'll have PIDs similar to the ones that I've showed you that we have handhelds, where they will detect a certain level of VOCs or HAPs, and that will trigger an opening of a SUMA canister, which then they will take and analyze and hopefully give us real-time data as far as what we're being exposed to. So right now on their website, they're posting every 4 weeks or so their samples of the passive tubes. They put these tubes out in 11 different areas, and they look for naphthalene, 1,3-butadiene, benzene, toluene, and hexane. Now, one of the questions I've had is they leave these sample tubes out for 2 weeks, and they say the samples are collected as the report that September 14th. Does that date mean the date they put the tubes out there, or is that the date they picked the tubes up? And you might say, well, does that make a difference? Well, it does, because we're taking air samples with our buckets, and we need to know what days these tubes encompass so that we can compare our results to their results. And I've asked Shell multiple times for something as simple as that, and I have heard crickets. So I think I figured it out by watching them enough when they post. It's 2 weeks. It takes them a week to analyze, and it takes them a week to post them. So if I watch close enough, I think I've got it, but I'd like them to tell me for sure. The other nice thing I think is going to happen, we had with one of our Eyes on Shell meeting, the Environmental Integrity Project is involved in this air monitoring. We're going to try to, right now, these numbers are coming off as PDFs. So trying to do any kind of analysis and stuff is difficult. They're going to try to request to have them have these numbers put into an Excel spreadsheet so that we can actually do some trend data and analysis on them. Right now, we can only compare from one time to the next. So here's an example of the ground flare, which we're calling the stovetop, and the date that it was observed. That's that glowing thing down there at the bottom. Interesting thing came up. I was out on the water with our Three River Waterskeeper, and on September 6th, and we noticed, and I don't know if you guys can see it, all depends on the roster of your computer, but we could see it with our naked eyes, and I could see it on my cell phone camera. But my computer right now, I see it because I know it's there. But we saw brown gas coming out of the two soup can flares, which may be contributing to the orange sky. So there's a little bit of a blow up of that. I don't know if anybody else can have a show of hands, if anybody's seeing brown or not. So, and to put a request in to have the DEP investigate this, I'm not sure what kind of roster they have, but we took the photograph and we're going to, manipulate it. We just increase the yellow contrast, and it makes the brown gas appear more than what you really kind of see. It's amazing how your eye is much more sensitive than sometimes your photograph or whatever. So we need to determine exactly, and we're trying to have the Eyes on Shell watch for that to see if that's contributing to the orange sky. The other thing that's been going on, this is one of the earliest ones that back in May, the high pressure, what we're calling the large pencil flare, it was pushing out some black smoke and stuff as they were starting it up. We thought, wow, that seemed like that was a lot at that time, and we were all getting, oh no, we got to watch this. But since then, we've had several incidences around September 10th, September 9th, September 18th, where the flare has put out a lot more brown gas, or not brown, black smoke, and this is another agreement that Clean Air Council and EHI, Tiger Project, have, that they made an agreement that Shell has a flare minimization agreement. And so we're working on collecting data to be able to track and see if they're meeting the terms of the flare minimization. So we have another example of a black flare on September 10th, again on the and then here's one, same one on September 18th, and Sometimes we find that they like to do the flares. This is actually going back in time, back on September 8th, but they do it at night. We don't know, don't want to say that they do it so we can't see the black smoke, but you can see that's a pretty big a flare going on there. And then this is back to the September 19th, again, another black smoke. So you can see that before, when we had the maple syrup smell, it was like one incident over several days. Now we're working on getting all these observations recorded in what we are Eyes on Shell journal, and also putting together a calendar that we've got so many good observers constantly sending us all this data. We want to make sure that we're not repeating or which ones are the same event and stuff. So we're currently working on getting that all organized so that we can see just how many times and from different advantage points what was taking place. And one of the things we just had done 2 Fridays ago, I think it's now been, or so, we had earthworks were up, and we went around and tried to capture all 8 of those stack emissions and get them taken by the forward-looking IR to be able to detect. And they're working that film up. This is just a general example of another case where they've done the flare work. One thing I forgot to mention, there's 8 point source emissions, those 8 stacks and flares but one thing we also have to keep in mind, there's over 1,000 fugitive emission sorts of leaks and things that could be happening. And so those also contribute to the emissions of the plant. We're also working with CMU that we've got 3 possible breathe cams getting ready to be located around the Shell plant. We have one in process that should be up by the end of the month. We've got one that's being arranged, and we're seeking out or getting permission for a 3rd one, and they'll all be from different angles of the plant. We had been going around trying to find places to put cameras, and there was a business right across the river from the plant, and they seemed to be quite amenable to having a camera. And then when we went back and asked them, what have you decided about the camera? We found out that they were already under contract with Shell, or a third party of Shell, that Shell has a camera on top of that building. And we've requested Shell to share their own video footage of their plant, but they have come back and said that's for their own internal use only. So we need to depend on our own breathe cams to be able to watch the plant, and we'll be much more able to respond to any type of incident and collect air samples and take handheld monitors and use those gas dispersion tubes so that we can collect some real-time data. And last but not least, again, working with the Create Lab and CMU, you guys have in Allegheny County a real good Smell Pittsburgh app. I think Matt might have mentioned 2 days ago on Thursday, you had a inversion overnight, and there was a big hydrogen sulfide smell. And I have it on my phone. And when I woke up, all of a sudden at the top of my phone, it always gives me some sort of the major activity. And for unusual, so early in the morning, the smell app came up. And so I looked at it, and I was quite amazed at how many smells there were for that day and stuff. But what I thought was interesting was then in the afternoon, Allegheny Health Department finally gave me a call telling me that there was a smell problem. And I was kind of like, gee, I already know that. We've got some good apps that are watching. And part of this is that the EPA has a smell program called Odor Explorer, and they have that to hook up to their database. And we're working with Southwestern Pennsylvania DEP to try to get the app for the Shell plant to be connected to them, so that they will, not only will we know how bad it smells or something going on, that they will also know that they need to respond. So here's a parting shot. This is what Beaver County, and like I said, I've talked to a lot of residents. Gee, I didn't know it was going to be that big. Gee, I didn't know it was going to be that loud. Gee, I didn't know it was going to be that bright. Oh, what about this orange sky? We're going to have that all the time now. So it's definitely making a difference on the quality of life of the people living around the plant, and also in the Ohio River Valley. Well, that was questions. Let me. So, any question? I think it'd be easier for me to see the questions if I stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, there's one, well, a couple little questions. One is, you mentioned fire pump stacks. Can you say anything about
They sent,
what they are? Fire pump stack.
yeah, they're on the list, and I can tell you exactly what they are permitted to emit and stuff due to the reading the air permit. But I think they have something to do with the cogen unit, since they're right behind the cogen unit. But
Mhm.
I'm not. We did look at those look at that area with the FLIR camera, and we didn't see any activity. So we're not sure if they haven't started that up yet, or what
They're
is going on there. But we are aware of them, and we will keep an eye on them and identify them when we see such activity.
And I brought Matt back into the picture because the only other substantive question is whether they've started posting CAMS data, which I presume is continuous air monitoring system. Because they're supposed to be doing that, posting those every day with 15-minute data on 15-minute increments. And if not, is there a time when that will be happening that we can anticipate?
Yeah, that there's some debate on exactly what the agreement says, whether or not it seems that it may be 30 to 180 days or something after the startup of the plant and things, but they're not doing. It's probably not going to be in any time in the near future that they're going to be doing the continuous. We hope. I find out from the lawyers that were at our meeting with that they're meeting with them, and we put the request in that they do it as soon as possible. We were quite amazed that they started the PAMs way ahead of time, and we think that's partly maybe we don't want to pat ourselves on the back too much, but since we were watching them and stuff, they may have thought it was a goodwill gesture. But again, they give you numbers, but they don't tell you what the number, so it's somewhat of a hollow thing. If they just would let us know, what does it mean when the date sample taken?
Mm-hmm. And one of our many Barbaras has pointed out that the orange sky was very orange on Monday evening, and wonders if it might have been from the Shell cracker plant.
It could have been.
Mhm.
We're trying, like I say, we're trying to get enough data for when it happens and also when it doesn't happen, and compare that to try to come up with. I've been looking at the National Weather Service and getting the aviation cloud cover, so I can know exactly at what different levels the clouds are at. The only trouble with that is the historical data for aviation only goes back 3 days. And then if you don't catch it in the 3 days, then you have to wait a month for them to post the historical data, which so I've been trying to capture it. In fact, that's a good reminder. I've got to do it again today to get that data. So it's difficult for all the orange skies that we've already encountered. It's going to be difficult to go back, but hopefully now, currently and into the future, we'll have the cloud data and also inversion data and be able to see what's actually happening there, and also measurements of nitrous oxide, nitrogen dioxide, if that's contributing to the orange sky. But it was definitely not anybody we had anticipated. It was quite a interesting sight the first time it happened. And it's been, then you thought it was just a one-off, but it's been pretty consistent.
Yeah, it's kind of apocalyptic looking, it seems. And they say, oh, it's just reflecting off the clouds. But when they're spewing out that much stuff, the brown gas that's going to probably condense into something, and the black smoke, and so they're manufacturing their own clouds to produce that.
What gets me is that the fact that in most of the photographs, and what we're trying to get when people say they observe the orange sky, is take note of, do they see any flares at all? And if there's no flares, but yet we have an orange sky, I think it's more likely it's the white light. You can see how much white light the plant puts out. And if you've got stuff in the clouds, I compare it to the old days of Los Angeles, when you used to look at and there's always that orange haze that was laid in the valley of Los Angeles. I think we might have that same thing happening here. And when the white light of the plant shines up there, you see that orange haze.
And actually, I think we both called the sort of pale brown emissions that showed up when you had a color enhanced image. I doubt that's a brown gas. That's probably brown particles.
It
Isn't
could be. I would think the particles might more be black, but
Well, there's brown particles.
yeah, it could be.
That's what.
Well, we need to look at it, right? If it's a particle, since you're a smoke watcher, right? That
I have
a particle would just keep getting diffused. Where if it's a gas, I would think like water vapor, it should just,
what that has to do with. No, the water vapor is invisible. And I think that most gases, the gas itself is invisible. It's when it condenses. So what Clifford is referring to, and which was pointed out to us in smoke reader training, is when you look at a poof of smoke, it is diffuse. It doesn't have sharp edges. But when you look at either a cloud, or well, a lot of clouds, not every cloud, but you often see these really sharp edges. One of the things that makes them so beautiful in the sky is they have all these interesting shapes and they have sharp edges. And what that has to do with is what's coming out. And in the case of water vapor emissions, which is harmless and which is a consequence of combusting anything, white versus black. I mean, if it's black, it's smoke. And if it's white, it could be smoke, or it could be
steam.
White smoke, or it could be steam. But if it's steam, that means it's emitting water vapor. It's condensing into steam. Steam is not water vapor. Steam is particles of water in the air. And what happens is, as that expands, there is a place where it's condensing and a place where it's not, because of the atmospheric conditions. This line of reasoning is related to why contrails happen, condensation trails from airplanes. So if anybody's talking to you about chemtrails, please don't listen. Because at certain altitudes, under certain conditions, the water really wants to condense. And so it does. And then it becomes ice, and those ice particles stay around for a while. And that's why we just have a lot more aviation now. And so we have a lot of contrails, and they happen more on some days than others. And it's not because there's more planes on those days, it's because there's the right conditions for making contrails on those days. So apart from that aside, so steam will make these sharp edged clouds, and smoke will make more diffuse. And you can have white smoke, you can have brown smoke, you can have black smoke. So I'm thinking that that brown stuff is not a gas, but it's particles. And that's why it's diffuse. What would happen if it was a gas? I mean, it may have been a gas when it came out, but in order to see it, I think it's probably a particle. And unfortunately, my spouse, who is a world expert on atmospheric particles, is currently in Europe doing atmospheric things. So,
Well, the thing,
that's,
nitrogen dioxide is a brown gas. And that's why when I first saw it out on the river, I thought it was, nitrogen dioxide.
well,
Yeah.
hence my deference to you, who is a chemist, that maybe if it's a brown gas, it's brown gas. I'm not saying it's not a brown gas because you are likely to know better than me. I'm just saying, looking to me, based on what I've seen, it could be smoke. It could be brown particles, but you know more about nitrogen dioxide being a brown gas than I do. So the,
Well, one other thing, Maren, when you talk about steam, I know that it can be somewhat little tricky. It all depends on the relative humidity that day. That right now in the fall, there shouldn't be any problem because the humidity is low, so the water vapor will just have that sharp edge. But sometimes in the summer, I've been told that when the humidity is high, it may look more like it's being dispersed because it's not being absorbed into the atmosphere as quickly.
well, let's say if it has sharp edges, then it's steam. If it doesn't have sharp edges, it might be ambiguous. I mean, some clouds have diffuse edges. I'm looking up in case you're wondering why. Right here, some clouds, and we can just look at the sky. There's the sky, and some clouds are sharper than others. Like cumulus clouds are very, they're notorious. They just have really sharp edges. And it's very cool. One of the things when one is flying in an airplane, which we hope everyone will do less of as time goes forward, but seeing what the clouds are and going into them when you pass that, the airplane goes right into a cloud, it's just really cool to see how sudden that transition is. Now, there seems to be a current rash of people posting amazing sunset photos on Facebook lately, and I'm sure other media like Instagram and TikTok and wherever people post their photos. But I don't necessarily think that the orange skies that we are seeing at sunset here in Pittsburgh are related to the cracker plant. It's a different kind of orange. It's like the kind of orange you'd see in a war movie because you've got all the smoke from explosions and you've got fire lighting up. So it's like doubly red. But it is certainly the case, and Mark commented, particle pollution, the stratosphere from wildfires from long distance transport can contribute to orange skies during sunset, and also industrial sources too. And
That was
that's
Matt's comment, just to be, Matt suggested that. So, and
Oh,
I agree with him. Yep.
yes, sorry, that was Matt, not
Yeah,
Mark.
I've been asking and from the photograph trying to take,
Mhm.
since most of the people live east of the plant, predominantly the ones we've gotten, but recently we've had a few people coming in to Beaver from Ohio. So they're actually looking east and they still see it. So the sun would be behind them and not in front of them.
Yeah, to the
So-
extent that it's happening right around the plant, it's some combination of what they're saying, which is, oh, it's just our orange flares reflecting off the clouds. That may be an element of it, but it could also be orange flares reflecting off of junk that they put in the atmosphere, and the junk they put in the atmosphere illuminated by all their white lights. Because you're right, those long shots of the plant at night aren't looking orange except when there is a specific flare. You said something about enclosed ground flares. So if they're enclosed, then we wouldn't be seeing light from them, right?
No, well, no, that the stovetop that's on the east side, that one you don't quite see, I don't think I've, the ones that, when I was up there, when I took my measurements, were the two soup cans.
Mhm.
And that was natural light coming out. You saw the orange color coming, out of the can. So like if you put a light bulb
Slide back up.
inside of a can,
You want to throw that slide back up
if I can,
if it's easy? And in general, I mean, the reason why sunsets and sunrises tend to be more orange than the rest of the day has to do with, and here I will use a tomato on my little bumper crop here to simulate the earth and pretend this tomato is an orange. So while you're looking for your slide, I'm going to give a little explanation why we see red sunset. So here's the earth. This is a tomato, it's almost ripe, some kind of green kind of tomato. And if you imagine that this tomato is actually an orange and you stuck a knife in directly perpendicular to the surface of the orange, you'd go through, say, 1/8 of an inch of peel. If you stuck a knife in obliquely, you might go through 1/2 inch of peel or more. So the light ray, when the sun is low, so when the sun is midday, it's just shining down through the atmosphere, and we're getting the minimum of atmosphere that it's shining through. When the sun is setting, so say the sun is over there and we're here, that sunlight is going through a much thicker amount of atmosphere, a much longer path in the atmosphere. And the particles in the atmosphere are scattering in a wavelength dependent way, such that shorter wavelengths get scattered a lot more than longer wavelengths by the 4th power of the wavelength. So it's really a pretty strong effect. And that's why the sky is blue, because what we're seeing when we look anywhere but at the sun is light that has been scattered by stuff in the atmosphere into our eye. And it's the blueness of the sky will show up better without other dark things. So that blue light that we're looking at there is light that has scattered away from somebody else's sunbeam. Okay. But and the sun looks probably a little yellower than it does because the blue light has scattered away because of that wavelength dependency. So then you have a sunrise or a sunset, and you're going through a much bigger, a bigger path through the atmosphere. A lot more blue light is scattered away, leaving the light even more red. So when we see the sun itself, don't look at it for too long, but you can tell that the sun is like a red circle, red disc. It looks much oranger than it does in the middle of the day. And the sky around it is also, since the blue light has been scattered off to the sides, what we're seeing from the direction of the sun is all this red light that is left after that blue light is scattered away. So what Matthew was mentioning in his comment was that the wildfires out west are putting smoke into the air. And it's not that the smoke is red, it's that it's scattering more blue light out of the path. So it's traveling around. Once stuff gets up into the stratosphere, there's no water there to rain it down. So it can stay in the stratosphere a long time. That's how volcanoes make the earth cooler, is by having such big explosions that stuff goes up into the stratosphere where there's no water, and it can hang for years, and nuclear winter and all that kind of thing. The appearance though of a beautiful sunset, even if it might have a regrettable cause, it's still a beautiful sunset, is different than the appearance that is over that plant. The appearance over that plant looks pathological. It's either brown stuff in the atmosphere or more stuff. It doesn't look like it's reflecting off the clouds, really. So I think they're feeding everyone a line of hooey. So
oh, come on. You
was
think that?
I do, I
Come
do.
on, Maren.
I'm
So
very suspicious
transparent.
about that maple syrup smell because for the first couple of days, it was described as an antifreeze smell.
Yes,
They
well,
latched
sweetness,
on
yes.
to, oh, it's maple syrup smell. That's pleasant, even though they're not a maple syrup factory. So that's very sneaky. But, and so I'm not saying that the beautiful sunsets we've had are because of the shell plant, although that's also partly because we're not that directly downwind of them much of the time, although the wind is usually blowing from the southwest and they're northwest of us, but there's also the river valleys to complicate matters, as Cliff and I were chatting about the other day. So, so it's conceivable it might be, but that also could be wildfires.
Well, but the only thing I would say now, I think that one slide said that they were telling us they were gonna start the flares up at the beginning of September. And
Mhm.
so we had wildfires during the summer and no one reported any orange sky through any time during the construction that I know about. But once they said they were gonna start up the flares, then all of a sudden we almost, that's why we gotta put that time calendar and stuff together to see if we can get a correlate, but it's pretty routine that most people have been calling in. That's why we've gotten a deluge of orange sky reports constantly that the person says, is this going to be the normal thing? So
Well, the orange sky at night over the shell plant is one thing. The spectacular sunsets that we've been having lately is another thing. And I don't know if we can ascribe one to the other. I'm not going to state that. But I have noticed there's been a whole lot of people posting spectacular sunset photos. I'm down in this valley, so I don't really see the sunset very well. I used to have great sunsets from our previous house on Hobart Street, but because our porch looked off over from a high point toward the west. So we enjoyed sunsets there, but we don't see a whole lot of sunsets here. So any other questions, or should we roll over to Mark? And thank Cliff for your excellent primer on what is going on with the shell plant now and how to understand what we see. And if anybody isn't already is near the shell plant and isn't already involved, get involved in Eyes on Shell. We can maybe put I'm sure there's a web page to sign up for that and get into the loop. Do you have that handy?
Yeah, I can put that. You want to see that one photograph we're talking about?
Oh, yeah. Since we were talking about it, and then I interrupted us with my tomato orange.
Now, that was a great view. I always ask my students whether they know why the sky is blue. And it just amazes me sometimes how they don't really ask questions. They just, well, why would we ask why the sky is blue? So are you seeing it now?
Yes.
Yeah, so that was taken on September 16th at 10:13 p.m.
Mhm.
And I attribute, now the question is, if you had a light bulb inside those cylinders or a flame, would it cause that much of a diffusion of the light?
It's definitely coming out of the cylinders, and
It's
then
definitely coming out of the
the
cylinders,
light
but
it's like that blue light to the left of the tall flare stack is blue below a certain point. So it does seem to be orange light coming out of there based on that particular photo.
what I'm saying, I have to put a candle inside of a soup can and see, I would expect the light to be more collimated.
I don't know what's going on inside the soup can, whether it is a lot of flares or a single flare. If it's a lot of flares within that soup can, then you would have like an umbra and penumbra on a solar eclipse because the disk is extended and not a point source. So if there were one candle, you would expect that. But if there's a bunch of sources in there, you would not.
All right. I have to
And-
tell, we have some aerial photographs where we do actually see inside.
Yes, that's key to get
So
some
we'll look
nocturnal
and see what we
aerial
see.
photographs. That would be great. You have to get high enough to see into them without impinging on their airspace if that's an issue.
I've seen some pre-release frac tracker ones with an orange disc looking down at the soup can flares. They're orange on the inside, bright orange.
Mhm. And there was a question going by, how can we monitor air in the stratosphere, whether it's wildfires or plant emissions or volcanoes? And Matt kindly addressed that. High altitude balloons with radiosonde equipment, also certain spectral cameras and equipment, can also place monitors on top of tall buildings, but they don't go up to the stratosphere. So I don't know if that's relevant. Penn State also has a plane with sensing and sampling equipment that flies over different point source areas. There are also satellites that can measure emissions from low Earth orbit. Yeah, but what they would be measuring is probably the quantity in the column, the whole path to the ground is what they would be seeing. I don't know that they could just, you'd have to be looking horizontally from above to see the stratosphere. So to know if air composition contains wildfire smoke or plant emission chemicals. It also, it may be, there are high altitude stratospheric airplanes, some manned and some unmanned, or personed and unpersoned, that do this kind of thing. And here's where I wish Neil were here, because that's the professor that he worked with at Harvard for 10 years did a lot of that. So Neil ran the lab side of that stuff, but they did a lot of field observations with high altitude stratospheric airplanes, and they were taking samples, and I guess they brought the sample. I don't know whether they brought the samples back or analyzed them on the plane or what, but anyway, so there are ways to know. And once stuff is up there in the stratosphere, it doesn't come down very soon. It just circles the Earth, because the thing that makes stuff come down is either the stuff is big enough that it falls, or if it's just tiny, it sticks onto a water droplet as the water droplet goes past. So that's why rain is important part of, you may notice the air smells cleaner after a rain, because all the raindrops gathered up pollution on the way down. So anyway, thank you very much, Cliff. And do we have any current data on this? Do you want to say your question, Mary Alice? Because I'm kind of not quite collecting it.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so we're trying to, I'm trying to follow this. I'm new at this, so I'm trying to follow as best I can from what I'm hearing, and I think we're trying to guess maybe about this orange in the atmosphere, exactly, what it's coming from. The plant may be lying to us. It could be the wildfires. We don't know, because we don't have actual samples. And so that's what I'm trying to find out, if there
I'd
way.
love to send a sample arm over the plant, but we can't do that. However, they are required to do some level of stack sampling. That's the CAMS, the continuous air monitoring system that Matthew was asking about. Because that's just part of their permitting, and their permit to operate involves providing ongoing continuous data. And it's not being provided yet because they're not operating yet. So all kinds of exceptions are made
Okay.
while they're testing things and cranking up and cleaning things out. And I mean, some of those, the maple syrup thing had to do with cleaning something. And
So, okay, so
to do with cleaning something. What?
So I'm saying the preliminary testing that the startup testing, blah, blah, is not really an accurate measurement right now to know if they're really breaking rules and stuff.
And the question
Well-
of stuff in the stratosphere is not what we're seeing over the plant. That is low atmosphere stuff, troposphere stuff.
Oh.
And
Yeah,
that is, I mean, either really weird low clouds, which just can't keep happening naturally, or stuff that they're putting into the atmosphere that is reflecting.
no, Maren, I'm going to, I've got all this data and measurements. I'm going to present it to the DEP and ask
good.
them, they should, even though they're not started up, as I understand it, they need to still monitor. They should be testing out their monitoring equipment on the stacks, and they
Mhm.
need to report that to the DEP. I'm probably going to end up having to do a right to know to get that data from them. But, I'm going to try to pursue that avenue to see if we can actually get the data of what they're monitoring as they're starting up the stacks.
Yeah.
And then that may solve the question or,
Well, thank you for taking a knowledgeable leadership role in that whole process, because this is super important. So, and Matt pointed out that the county health department has used satellite data to evaluate the influence of wildfires out west on our own air. But stuff is up there in the stratosphere, and when we're seeing the sunsets, that's what's going on, is probably stuff in the stratosphere. When we're seeing these low, weird, foggy clouds over the Shell plant, that's something else. And I don't know if folks remember, it was a couple years ago, there was a Christmas time, it was like started on Christmas Eve. There was bad emissions from, I think, mostly Clairton and an inversion. And there was like disgusting brown fog. I mean, I live in a valley here, and just looking across the street, it was like being in LA, basically. And there is a reason why California has stricter air regulations than the rest of the country, because they've got a lot of air problems. And Pittsburgh is up there in, and Mark grew up in LA and denies that it's as bad. I don't know. I remember one time I was out at Jet Propulsion Lab for the Voyager Neptune encounter. And I was staying with a friend who lived in Altadena and going down into Pasadena. So I just remember it's like as we would drive down this small mountain, whatever the height is. And I could see there was a layer of brown over Pasadena. Okay, Pasadena's worse than LA. I'm just lumping them together. So that's what we had for like a week after, I think it was Christmas Eve fires at Clairton that knocked out their pollution control equipment. And it coupled with an inversion that locked all that pollution into the valley. Because normally the temperature decreases on the way up. But if you have various conditions that cause it to be the other way, pollution gets trapped. If the temperature is decreasing on the way up, then warm stuff down below will just go up and everything will circulate. But if an inversion that is the bane of regions that are as hilly and valley-ish as we are here, that have pollution sources, that traps the pollution in the valleys, and that can be very unhealthy for people. And you've heard of the Denora smog, which was in 1948, I believe, and something like 26 people died right away, but a lot of other people were sickened. And 26 people doesn't sound like a lot, but Denora was a really little town where there was a zinc smelter, and they had an inversion and people were dropping like flies. They ran out of coffins. The London killer fog was in 1952, I think, and similar things happened there. And it was in the Thames Valley, was an atmospheric inversion, and there thousands of people died. And of course, many more were sickened, and they probably also ran out of coffins. So these things happen every so often. I don't know if anybody died during that experience we had a few years ago, but I think the asthma hospitalizations went up. So February COVID-19, Mark is remembering. And combined with Clareton's broken state, it got really bad. And, oh, and Matthew posted a map that shows locations of smoke in the US from wildfires. That's interesting. Maybe we can bring that up.
So Maren, I posted the webpage for Eyes on Shell and also the
Yes.
email for
Thank
Eyes
you.
on Shell.
Okay, this is taking a while to come up. There's a map. It's not looking like it's showing smoke. So it was February. Yeah, I don't know. I remember a brown fog in our valley and it was gross and I didn't want to be breathing it. Okay, so thank you, Clifford, and thank you for your work and for sharing it with us. And thanks to the Create Lab. I think they're the ones who provided those wonderful aerial/drone images. And so we hope to get even more imagery of this plant as it cranks up. And I think one thing I was going to say about, we're seeing all this stuff spew out, big black flares and black smoke and brown gas or smoke or whatever. And on the one hand, this is their startup period and they're supposed to be given a little extra slack on issues and, you know, extra emissions during the startup period. But on the other hand, it's not running full tilt. So I don't know whether we should expect worse problems because that's just little tastes of their operational emissions, or less because this is that startup period where they're given extra slack. So I don't know if anybody has any insight on that. But at this point, thank you so much, Cliff. We'll bring on Mark Dixon, who is familiar to all any regular salon goers. And is a very, he's an environmental filmmaker and environmental activist here in the Pittsburgh region, and creator of Yurt and film about Rachel Carson, and currently working on a film about our local air quality. Inversion, I think, the unfinished business of Pittsburgh's air. Is that it? Oh, good. So one of the things, Clifford was talking about Eyes on Shell, which is a terrific cross-community initiative to really scrutinize everything we can about Shell from many vantage points around the plant and involving people who live near the plant. Mark himself has been quite a powerhouse with an kind of an adjunct to that, or I think your efforts predated the creation of Eyes on Shell, getting air monitors installed all around the plant. And he's talked about them at the fall air salons every so often over the years. But so he's here with an update on that. And he also mentions that both Power of One Voice, Rachel Carson's legacy film, is available free, and Yurt is available free, and he put links to them in the chat. So that's terrific. www.yurt.com and lens.blue/Power of One Voice film with hyphens for those who might be watching this recording and want to go check out those films. Thank you, Mark, for that awesome work. And I cannot wait to see what comes out of your film. Just the little teasers that you've had from it have been so impressive. And thank you for that work. And thank you for this monitoring work that you'll share with us.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I am delighted to also announce that I haven't posted this on social media yet, but the Inversion documentary was chosen as a summer award winner by the Rogobee Foundation.
Oh,
For
congratulations.
a significant grant, chosen one of 5 films out of 236 submissions for that funding source. So
Awesome.
it's moving along, and we also have 2 other grants that I can't announce yet, but those have come through as well. we're not rolling in all the money, but we have definitely been given some support from outside the from outside of my savings account. So, so that was good. And it's always nice to get a little external validation where someone said, you know,
Oh, yes.
we believe in this film. And so
Well,
also that
well
film
deserved.
I have hopefully for you today, I think some fun stuff, some free stuff, some walk down memory lane, a little bit about monitors, a little bit about the photos in the orange glow. I think I've got some interesting stuff, and then a little bit about social license to operate. So I'm just going to kind of wander on down the memory lane there, but I'd like to share my screen if I could, Maren. That I probably have permission if that's all right. There we go. Can you see that? Anyone?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. I animated this. It's a postcard, a video postcard. Welcome to Pennsylvania, where plastic is our life. But oh no, it shortens our life. And you know, I went out to every time I go out to do some monitor installations. Not every time, but lately I have been bringing my cameras with me, and so a couple months ago I got this nighttime shot of Shell, and I put it on the No Petro PA website, or one very close to it, and you can see the lighting is not so bad. I mean, it's bright, but it's not lighting up the sky. But then you can kind of look and see, this is a photo of a Shell poster. They were asked for their lighting permit to highlight what Shell would look like on the horizon. And there's a lot more going on in this image than this image. Like 1,000 times more lights. So I thought that was pretty interesting, roll down memory lane. Now, this is not a great photo. This is a photo of a poster that they presented by some researchers, like some consulting firm or something that had
Is
done
that
lighting.
reflection on the poster where it's light in the left quarter and towards
What-
the right middle?
There's glare on the poster
Okay.
here,
I was wondering.
here, and over here.
And the view seems like it's from farther away than the photograph.
Yeah, I tried to pan out a little bit. I don't have a perfect analogous shot, so this shot is closer in.
Yeah.
But you can see, you can kind of count the lights on your, on your fingers and toes. Tick, 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 tick. And here, you cannot count the lights. There's just too many. And then you look at this, and then you say, okay, but then compare it to photos like the ones that Cliff was showing. This was another day I went out. Boom!
Whoa.
This
That's
or this.
apocalyptic.
Would you have signed up for Shell if you knew that this was going to be what you'd see instead of this? Because this is what they were presented in 2016 at a public meeting, and this is what we got. This is another view. Oh, let's see. And then this is another one. Cliff showed this one, though. This was a nice close-up shot. But then I've also created, this is an animation, a video.
Mm-hmm.
So you can kind of see what it looked like, which gives a lot more information than a photo, especially at this resolution. And the best part about it is I turned it into a Zoom background.
Here, here.
And so you can download the Zoom background yourself. I'm going to put that in the link, and you can use this if you want to. You have my permission to use it in Zoom.
Oh, fun.
I have this one, and I have another one. This one. Let's see. This is an animation. This is not actual pollution coming out of Shell. So, good times. Got to keep it fun sometimes, because otherwise it just gets too depressing. So I'm going to leave it on this one that I like. Yeah, good. Okay, so I got the shell burning behind me. Now I want to highlight, thank you. There are two monitoring projects that I've been working on. One is sort of called, just for lack of a better name, the Community Monitoring Project. And then even more for lack of a better name is the BC Mac Monitoring Project. The Community Monitoring Project is funded by the Direct Sport Fund, which is made possible by the Heinz Endowments and the 11th Hour Project of the Mountain Watershed Association. They asked me to say all this stuff. And then BC Mac Monitoring Project is kind of rooted in their work around Shell, and I would encourage everybody to go to Eyes on Shell. And I'll let Maren drop the link in there if she wants to. Basically, the Community Monitoring Project involves funding to deploy 20 sites of air monitors, low-cost monitors. Each site was designed to get an AirViz monitor, which primarily measures VOCs, but also measures particles. Oh, Maren, that went private. And then also each site has a purple air monitor, which primarily measures particles, but also measures VOCs, although experimentally, as Purple Air puts it. Hopefully they'll get better with the experimental and make it less experimental over time. A couple of my AirViz monitors have fried, and I don't know whether I'll be able to get them fixed or not with my current budget. So right now we're losing a couple of them, but the Purple Airs are mostly still up. We have 19 Purple Airs deployed, though one just went down I just checked today. They go down periodically, so 19 have been deployed. And then for BC Mac, 5 Purple Air monitors have been deployed to add to the network. And we will have a report that is developed by the Environmental Health Project that will show kind of a before and after of the monitor results. Now, this shows the monitors, the Purple Air monitors primarily in Pittsburgh, but then also up around Shell. Most of these monitors are through the 2 programs that I mentioned, though not every single one of these monitors. There are a couple people who have put some out on their own. And this is the latest map. So this is a few months ago, and then I've gotten a few more up now. So you can see there's a little extra density of monitors up here. And lots of people keep deploying monitors in the Pittsburgh area. It was the monitoring work that I had done and that the Create Lab had done with AirViz, deploying AirViz monitors all over and looking at VOCs and particles in the Mon Valley that, well, particularly the VOC monitoring that AirViz was doing, that led me to feel like the state of the art of the low-cost monitors was at a level that would be useful for measuring pollution coming out of Shell. And so I put out the word to the community that I was looking for funding for it, and the community, Mountain Watershed Association in particular, found me and found some funding, and we put it all together, and then we've been getting these monitors up. I think the first monitors went up, handful of them went up at the end of 2020, literally the last day of 2020. And then I've been trickling up monitors ever since then. So we've had quite a few monitors up for many, many months, if not years, or going close to 2 years for the oldest monitors in this network up in here. But groups like Community First have been deploying monitors along this river valley. That's been super cool and helpful, because you can kind of see the gradient of pollution moving up or down this river valley. And then, of course, lots of groups are deploying monitors in Pittsburgh and around in Allegheny County and beyond. This is a little more close-up of the monitors that have been deployed around Shell. You can kind of see the focus of my 2 projects, especially with the Community Monitoring Project, but also the BC Mac project, was kind of in a sort of a bullseye circle around Shell, where you have more monitors in the middle area where the most people are and the closest to Shell. So I've got a lot of monitors in this sort of Beaver area, Vanport. We've got 2 monitors right here. And then as you get out further, the monitors get more sparse. I'm still trying to find some monitor sites to go west of Shell. And then I've also found that it would be really cool if we could get some monitors up north of Shell in this area. You can see there's not a lot of monitors to see how the air moves from the northwest to the southeast. And this is a common wind pattern that occurs. And so I'd love to get some monitors up in this area. As currently I have, a lot of people ask me, are you seeing like wacky stuff on the monitors or, telltale signs? Right now, I'm not seeing just super dramatic results on the monitors. I'm watching for those. I think that yeah, the jury's still out. We don't know how much Shell is actually operating right now. We don't know if they've been operating at a high intensity during a period where there's a strong inversion, because that can make a difference. Even Clairton can seem to be a clean operator. You got all these green monitors around here where Clairton is. If you have enough wind dispersing that pollution, then it can, leave these monitors mostly green. So
Canadota in that area, Mark? Where
what's
you
that?
want- Is Canadota? Lake
Canada-
Canadota, is that in where you need monitors? I have a friend that lives in Canadota.
Oh, I don't
Looks
know.
like that might be there.
Where is it in
Near,
Pennsylvania?
yeah, right where the white arrow is right now. It's about where it'd be. Conneaut Lake, and it's a little north of Conneaut Lake. It's about not an hour and a half, 2 hours from here.
If it's in this area, then that could be useful. And we would probably want to connect them up with Cliff, but I don't know if Cliff is interested in driving way up here. This is a really long way. So
Yeah.
this I'm showing my interest. I don't know exactly what the infrastructure is to accomplish that yet, but there may be more than one way to address this. And I'm just sort of highlighting how I'd love to have some monitors up here. And that's kind of how all the rest of these monitors started. Was I kind of just started talking about, hey, I think I'd like to have some monitors out here. And then, and a lot of that conversation started in this salon, and a lot of people pooled money together to buy 100 monitors, most of which are deployed in the Pittsburgh area. And so this monitoring around Shell is a ripple upon a ripple that started, at least in earnest, at least with my involvement, it started in earnest through collaboration with the salon attendees. So I like to tell you my vision, and then you all have had a knack for like helping to make it happen if the vision aligns with kind of broader community goals. So thanks for that. It's really great. And then the monitor program has put me in touch with a lot of different people in the area. Two of whom have moved away because of concerns about the Shell pollution. Several of whom have talked to a number of different journalists, and many who stay in touch with me, and they report things to me. They send me photos. People who I reached out to who did not get a monitor, but who maybe asked for one. Several of them have stayed in touch and send me sort of on the ground information about what's going on in the community or around Shell. Somebody recently sent me an audio file of the sort of low rumble. So it's all kinds of connectivity that happens with people who get these monitors. Even if we don't have like any kind of smoking gun about harm through these monitors, it puts us in touch with people who help us really keep a close eye on Shell. And so, and also, the jury's still out on whether we're going to see really dramatic pollution emerging from the Shell plant, I think. Though so far, I haven't had anything where I felt like I really needed to reach out to the monitor hosts to tell them, run for the hills. I have not had any kind of incident like that yet. Another thing that I presented a couple years ago that I wanted to reprise a little bit here is a little diagram that I highlighted about sort of a vertex point, kind of a pivotal point in Shell's history, where the jobs were going to go up and then they're going to go down. And we've seen that now. The jobs are in sort of a plummeting zone. And then the pollution is going to go up. This is what I had originally presented, though I think we may see this may be more like a symbol of inversions rather than industrial processes. But I think the amount of pollution that they can emit does change and can change dramatically depending on whether or not they're doing those super giant black soot flares that that Cliff highlighted in some of those awesome photos. So we may see ups and downs of that, but I think that can be combined with the anti-plastic movement. The climate movement continues to grow. The fracking movement for push on fracking ban, well, I don't know if it's moved linearly like this. I think that there's still some pressure and data coming in to highlight how a fracking ban could really be valuable. I had high hopes for the No Petro movement, but it has not gone like this because of I stopped showing up at people's houses and events because of the pandemic. But without the pandemic, we might not have had some of the online meetings that we did. Though I think that the Eyes on Shell movement, in many ways, was kind of there was some destiny involved because there are a lot of people who are concerned, and BC Mac and a lot of folks in the Breathe Collaborative have been really trying to create a place where people can converge and learn about issues about Shell, and that gradually moved into this Eyes on Shell effort that we've talked about a little bit on this call, but then probably many of you have attended a number of Eyes on Shell meetings. And I think that the Eyes on Shell popularity and brand recognition is really taking off fast. And so we see the job information, the job benefits plummeting while so many other trend lines are emergent and moving up very quickly. And I've been really pleased to see that. And all that leads me to believe that I think we're at a real fulcrum point right now where the status quo in the sort of tension between the community and Shell as an entity in the region is hanging in the balance of what happens over the next few weeks and months. Will Shell be accepted as a generally good neighbor or as a reasonable neighbor, or will they be just continually derided and rejected as a corporate neighbor in perpetuity? And I think that Shell really wants to gain acceptance in the community. And I think it is perhaps one of the primary things that Shell wants from the community is to be accepted. Acceptance leads to all kinds of fringe benefits for a company like Shell. It lets them put their cameras up in places they want. It lets them have an easier time with additional permits when they need to apply for those. If there's general acceptance, then people are less inclined to to submit reports to groups like Eyes on Shell. Whereas if there's less acceptance, then they may run into challenges all across the board. Things like here I've got a few notes about this. I think of this as the social license to operate is what Shell is really seeking from the community, and they want our land, they want our physical bodies, they want to be able to pollute them with air and water pollution. They want our tax revenue that the state of Pennsylvania has committed in that $1.65 billion tax benefit to Shell. And the more that the more social license they have to operate, the more that the community tolerates them or accepts them or embraces or identifies with Shell as their own, then the less trouble Shell has in getting what they want over the near term and the long term. I think, and as a result of that, it's my assertion, my hypothesis that everything that you say or don't say, do or don't say, may have an impact on Shell's social license. If you report issues, that diminishes Shell's social license. If you speak out against Shell at hearings, if you speak out against them about CO2 emissions, air pollution, water pollution, plastic pollution, speaking to journalists with deep concerns about Shell's operations, existence, their problems that are emergent from the plant, all of that can reduce their social license to operate. You can post things online, tweet things, make bumper stickers, put up house signs. Thanks, Mary Alice, glad to have you here. You can team up with and join and go to meetings for Eyes on Shell. Marin had the link up in there. You can watch for issues. You can take air samples, talk with Cliff about helping out with air sampling if he's looking for volunteers. You can volunteer in other ways. There's all kinds of work that happens when we're logging and trying to make sense of all these reports. And so the more people who are engaged with that and can devote a material amount of time to it can be really helpful. And then just telling friends, neighbors, and colleagues about what's going on with Eyes on Shell and how there's a a destination for concerns, that we're tracking them and collecting them and making, making news out of them, so that we can hold more tightly on the social license for Shell to operate, and then only grant Shell any kind of remote semblance of a social license in small tidbits, and only as we feel they have earned it. I don't know that they can ever get my personal social license in any measure, because I don't feel that a company that emits that much carbon dioxide and pollution into the environment in an already heavily polluted area in a planet that already has so much CO2 emissions, I do not believe that they will ever gain a moral license in my mind to operate. But I recognize that there's a spectrum of opinions about that. And so any kind of reservation of control of social license, I think, has a beneficial impact for having them behave better in the long run. You can ask about buying, getting a monitor or buying one of your own. You can talk to friends and neighbors about what's going on there, your elected representatives. You can refuse membership of Shell employees or Shell proponents on school boards, corporate boards, nonprofit boards, etc. You can refuse funding from Shell. You can talk about Shell issues in PTAs. A lot of the pollution is going to be falling in the area of Beaver, where students, young children live or go to school. I believe that Shell may be trying to move some curriculum that is pro fossil fuels, or at least benign, in their view of fossil fuels, into schools as curriculum. And I think that there can be a parent-teacher outrage about Shell having influence on the curriculum of schools and universities, community colleges. I know that they've developed a series of classes that will train people to do some of the things that Shell wants employees to do. And I think that there's also, while I think it's important to not be cruel or to be sort of doxing necessarily of rank and file Shell employees, I think that privately there is a room for a certain amount of peer pressure about, if somebody's deliberating on whether or not they want to work for Shell, or if they're thinking about maybe not working for Shell, or that they already do, that you may have an opportunity to gently discuss with them the possibility of not participating in the planetary and community destruction environmentally, and in so many other dimensions that Shell creates. And so, you can participate in that, or you may be able to invest your time and energy and your expertise in other types of things that are more noble or more needed at this time, like any kind of renewable energy, green economy stuff, green chemistry stuff. There's so many opportunities to participate and lend your life force to things that we need so much more than more plastic and more pollution at Shell. And so sort of to wrap that little portion, I believe that there's normative behavior. We have to make normative behavior critical of Shell at every turn, in every forum. We have plenty of reasons, and now is the time. It's a pivotal time to not give Shell an inch, and to turn this facility into a kind of an ostracized cultural outlier, that they are not accepted, tolerated, or welcomed here at all. I have also I did an interview with a woman, PhD researcher, I believe, Gwen Ottinger, who presented at the salon a few years ago. And I was so impressed by her knowledge and her ability to characterize that knowledge verbally, that I asked her to sit down with me for an interview, and she did. And so I have a little bit of her talking about social license, and then I'm almost done. So what I'm gonna do is stop share, reshare with audio engaged. There we go.
And companies have this thing that they talk a lot about called social license to operate.
Oh, sorry.
And companies have this thing that they talk a lot about called social. And companies
There we
have
go.
this thing that they talk a lot about called social license to operate, which says, yes, we need permission from the authorities. But if we don't have permission from a larger group of stakeholders, right? If the society, if the neighborhood, the community yanks their permission, then we've got a problem. Because every time we go to the authorities, like there's some big fight. So you can still appeal to that notion of social license to operate. And if you make it very clear that you don't have our permission, and we are stakeholders too, and we will make your life very difficult, and that social license to operate, you don't have it. That's the way to go. Whether it will be successful or not, who knows? But that's the way to go. But thinking because they have permission, they have a right, that's not what needs to be happening right now.
So I think I just want to, I just want to close on that. And I'm happy to like get into question and answer, Q&A, dialogue, anything with anybody who wants to chat about this stuff. I just have huge thanks for the Breathe Collaborative and Matt for creating a forum where people have been gathering for years, since like 2016. I've been in Breathe Collaborative calls about Petro stuff that whole time. As soon as it was like kind of where I found people to be in orbit with around shell issues. And then also I want to give a big thanks to Clifford as well. There have been a lot of technical things that I've kind of got myself into over the years, and Clifford has come in with such technical expertise and taken a lot of the monitoring and to a new next generation kind of level. And I'm so grateful to both of them for all the real material life force that they have dedicated to moving the movement forward and propelling it into areas that I think are impossible for someone to do by themselves. And so it's been just a pleasure to work with them and to work in league with them on issues that are just bigger than any single person. So thanks, y'all.
Well, thank you, Mark. Are there any questions? I didn't see particular questions going by. But I think that Matthew, who laid the groundwork at the beginning of what our actual air quality situation is in our region, also has insights on what needs to be done about it, where to go from here. So shall we find Matt, who is a fellow?
He's right there.
The sun is setting behind him wherever he is.
And is it very orange, Matt?
It's on this side. This is not my attempt to do my impression of Harvey Two-Face.
It's not a shelf layer on your face either.
Yeah, no, that's not a shelf. It's actually a beautiful sunset
Awesome.
on the west.
Wildfires or shell or who knows what. Anyway, and I see, let me see who we have here. As far as I can tell, you and I are the only ones who are toughing it out outside.
It's
outside.
beautiful outside. It's absolutely gorgeous outside.
Outside in Shell there?
Look at me. I'm at Shell. I'm not just outside.
Yeah, right. Uh-huh.
Cool.
I just love the way the smoke goes in your ear.
Marcy has a plant in her head, but anyway.
So, okay, well, I mean, there are ways this conversation can go. It all kind of is built around the theme of accountability, and it's whether we want to focus more on Allegheny County Health Department or on broader regional leadership. So, because I don't know if we really have time for both tonight. So, what is more, centered. In following up with Mark's talk, and Cliff's talk, it's more the broader regional leadership accountability piece that I think fits better. But you know, we can take this where you all would like. So I'll just pause and ask, you know, okay. So all right, so Mark's put the hydrogen hub stuff. So why don't we go in this direction then here? Okay.
It kind of, the hydrogen hub kind of converges the stuff from ACHD with the Shell stuff
Yeah.
with the future.
Yeah, here. Sorry, give me a second here. I thought I had my desktop showing this. Okay. There it is. Okay. So here is, you know, the next part of this talk. So we have a serious future vision and leadership problem. So inertia, avoidance, denial, obfuscation, and mendacity only exacerbate and accelerate the price that we continue to pay. So that is kind of the theme of these next few slides. Okay, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. So this is a report that was released at the end of April of 2022 by the Allegheny Conference on Community Development. And pictured there are the president of PNC Bank, Bill Demchak, and the president of Shell Pennsylvania, Hillary Mercer. And they are the featured people in this report. And it's about the future. And this is really the whole framing and envelope in which all of our advocacy work is going to need to focus, especially in the next 2 to 3 months. And in many ways, this is what set the platform for the clean energy ministerial that just happened here in Pittsburgh. It was a result of this work. So this is what the Allegheny Conference's vision is, and it's got a climate focus. And basically what you see there is, what they're arguing is they're perfectly willing to ignore the 1.5 degree pathway for climate work. That actually the Allegheny Conference is saying, well, we're actually in our region, we're going to shoot for a 2 degree midpoint pathway. So that's what our region's leadership is saying what our goal should be by the year 2050. Just blow off the, you know, Paris Climate Accord. And if you look at how the emissions reductions are planned in their report, you see that they are planning on 0 industrial emissions reductions by the year 2030. 0, okay? If you look at the power sector, which is the blue, there's a slight reduction in power sector emissions. However, if you read the report and you see that 2019 is chosen as in a base year, they're including as part of that reduction the closure of the Cheswick power plant, which just happened this year. So just about all of the power sector reductions in emissions have already happened, meaning they're not really asking for a whole lot more between now and the year 2030. Now there's some slight reduction in transportation emission reductions, and you know, the building sector, they're calling for more emission reductions, but it's a much smaller slice of the overall impact. And so they're really backloading all the emissions reductions to between 2030 and 2050 and choosing a 2 degree pathway, okay? So for those of us who work in air quality and climate, this is repulsive. You know, it goes right to social license. Like, how can leaders say that this is somehow okay? This is also from that same report, and you look at where they're asking for funding. So this is funding by theme in billions of dollars of where they want money to be spent in our region. And at the top of this tornado diagram is carbon capture demonstration projects. They want $12 billion to be invested in our region for carbon capture and sequestration, which those of us who work in this area know CCS really doesn't work, okay? And at the bottom of this list, you see, $100 million invested in solar and wind energy, okay? This is like totally upside down in terms of actual priorities for what we should be meeting. But this is what our region's leadership is saying what we want. And so on Thursday's Petrochemical Systems call, it was disclosed that our state legislature is about to take up a bill that would grant $5 billion for carbon capture and sequestration projects. So, those of us who've worked on the Shell project think of the $1.65 billion tax break that Shell has gotten, which is the state's largest in its history, as an outrage. Now we're talking about supersizing that subsidy to $5 billion. And this comes right out of the plan, is that government funding will be essential to finance the build out. So business is not planning on paying for this itself. They want us to pay for this. And so we see headlines like this: U.S. Steel, EQT, and Shell announce plans for a low carbon hydrogen storage hub. I call this the unholy alliance. They know that they need each other, and so they are teaming up. So the company that has polluted people's air for over 150 years is sharing with the new kid in town, the Shell folks. As Mark described, they want advice for how they can permanently install themselves in the region. The way U.S. Steel's brand and identity is so deeply intertwined with Greater Pittsburgh, that is what Shell wants. And EQT, being the supplier of gas, they basically want to be the glue that connects it all together. Okay, and Mark's first slide was, Pennsylvania, where where plastics harm your health here. I actually think the state's motto should be, "Welcome to Pennsylvania, we've got gas." Okay, so this was also in August. Hydrogen a winner, as Manchin forces a diverse energy transition policy approach. This is announced right before the ministerial that just happened here. There are billions of dollars. In fact, there's something in here called 45Q, which is a limitless tax break where any company that would spend any amount of money on building out a carbon capture and sequestration would automatically receive a tax break. Okay, this is where the switches have been set. Okay, and then this is, a $3.2 billion section in the code of this particular bill, where that money's being set up for CCS. Now, this is a photograph that I took when I was driving back from West Virginia. This is on I-70 heading westbound just outside of Washington, PA. It's actually just before entering Pennsylvania from West Virginia. And this photograph of hydrogen being shipped by truck. Now, in all of my years of traveling around Pittsburgh's highways, I have never seen hydrogen being shipped around like this. But in some ways, this to me is indicative that some of this is already here. Some of this hydrogen infrastructure is already being built, and it is already being used and shipped around by truck, and we're likely to start seeing it shipped by rail and other means. You combine this, so this is a conversation about leadership, right? So this is from May 2nd, 2019, the big rally at the U.S. Steel Edgar Thomson Works, where they, announced that there was going to be, actually it was $1.5 billion invested in the Mon Valley. And then just a few weeks later, a year and a half later, it is all nixed. It's all taken away. So you know, these are all U.S. Steel workers, which not shown in this photograph or who was on the stage. It's Hillary Mercer. It is the leadership of the Allegheny Conference. Pittsburgh Works Together, Rich Fitzgerald, and our lieutenant governor as well too. Now, you know, I'm not going to show this, but this is the fire incident from the Clairton Coke Works and some of the flaring that resulted of that from that period of time. 100 days. This is above the Mon River, across from Glassport. And just to give you an idea how big that flare is, the span of that is about 4 railroad cars long. So it is a massive flare that was being, you know, deployed. This is what our leadership is ignoring. This is what our leadership is not factoring into its decision making. That lying and manipulation and framing issues that go against what the people of the Mon Valley and the Pittsburgh region and impacted communities have asked for and wanted for generations. Okay, but you know, this is that hearing where U.S. Steel is basically saying nothing to see here when that fire broke out, and they operated that plant for 100 days and emitted the equivalent of about 11 years worth of pollution in 100 days. So, you know, what to do about this? So our groups in the Breathe Project have started to push back on it. The first thing we did after U.S. Steel announced it's not investing in the region, and the fact that there wasn't any governmental response to it, was to call that out. So we wrote an open letter to all of our region's business and civic leaders on the future of the Mon Valley. And some of the things that we put in there was we need a vision centering on improving the health of communities with leadership and reliable good faith partners that keep promises, a plan respecting residents' rights to clean air and water and a healthy environment, investments in people, not in industries, and, you know, addressing the climate necessities of the, you know, the near term and the long term solutions that are needed for that, and jobs that don't hurt people or communities. Okay, so this is what we've been advocating for. And thankfully, you know, the Ohio River Valley Institute has launched, and they are people that are good at analyzing policy. And so they basically have documented how our state's policymakers and our region's policymakers have misplaced their faith in petrochemicals once again. They're driving our region into a dead end. Now, what this shows is a comparison of counties where natural gas infrastructure was built up versus other rural, mostly rural counties that did not get built up by the petrochemical build out of starting in 2008. And then comparing that with how well that those both compare with the state as a whole. And what this shows is, yes, during the gas boom period, the counties that got money related to petchem did have a bigger boost in their, as measured by gross domestic product, okay, which is overall economic activity measured in dollars. But if you look at, okay, that money was sent into those communities, but what happened? Did it retain people there in terms of workers? No. The natural gas counties actually performed worse in terms of retaining people as compared to other rural counties where there wasn't any natural gas investment. And if you compare that with the rest of Pennsylvania, you know, those counties still suffer population loss. So yeah, the money's there, but that money's not going to keep people in these communities. Then if you look at employment, again, there's almost no difference between the counties that got natural gas money versus control. So what is this telling us? It means that that money that boosted the GDP in those counties, it went to a very small group of people. It went to an elite group of people and some temporary workers that got some money for a short period of time, but is not translated in any way, shape, or form into long-term benefits for these communities where these investments happen. And in fact, there's a contrast here with some work by business analysts and anthropologists that show that actually the best way to invest money is in infrastructure related to everyday people's lives in communities. In other words, these are the investments in libraries, investments in grocery stores, investments in small businesses, investments in transportation infrastructure, investments in internet infrastructure. All of these things translate into much more successful, or just rehabilitating homes, improving the quality of people's homes and the jobs that get created there. These are much better ways for how money should be spent, not in terms of the way that it was done in our state. This is just a very fancy and official way of saying things like, people know what they need. We need to listen to what people in communities say they want. Invest in people. Don't do it in a paternalistic and technologically centered way. And then, you hear all the time, you've got to show the business case. Well, anytime someone leads with that, we should actually be skeptical about that, because the business case leads more towards small groups of people getting large chunks of money at the expense of other people. And we need to start flipping that on its head and saying, okay, if this money's showing up here, show us exactly how it's going to lead towards stabilizing and retaining people and improving people's quality of life. And having leaders that are proud of the fact that the health of communities are improving, rather than ticking off some numbers that make it sound like something's happening, but isn't happening. We have seen, and people see, I use this slide all the time. We've been down this path before. This is the U.S. Steel Homestead Works, okay? Nobody ever saw this collapsing, but it did collapse because it is an imbalanced system. It was not a systematic investment in a community that was sustainable over the long haul, because it was in a high volume, low margin commodity business that was subjected to world pricing of the market that leads to instability and eventual abandonment of communities. So this is the sort of vision that we need to avoid, but where the petchem vision, and the Shell vision is essentially just a redux. It's a repeat of what we know is not the right way to go. And it's against all of what we need to do for climate purposes. So in any event, that's just sort of a short accountability frame that can help spur some additional discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. When you say cultures that lacked the ability to adapt, was it? It put me in mind of, I just heard something on the news on the NPR recently about how some of the statues in Easter Island have now been damaged by these events, and that's very sad. It's sort of like they're losing twice. Something that a little stuff has gone by in the chat. It seems ironic that the CEO of Shell is one of the main leaders in the Allegheny Conference effort, leading to a report that has decarbonization in the title. And they seem to have some very weird perspectives. They're looking as though 2050 is the goal. I have for a long time thought, why are we talking about only by the end of the century, the end by 2100? That's very short-sighted. And so they have cut that in half. And so they're acting as though the goal is to have 1.5, 2, or they mention 1.5 on that lower graph by 2050. But no, the warming is going to continue as long as we have this excess carbon in the atmosphere. And a little hint is that carbon in the atmosphere lasts essentially forever. Methane is very short-lived, but carbon dioxide stays there for upwards of 10,000 years, 10 to 100,000 years. So their goal that they're starting with that 3-line graph is wrong. It's far, far, far from the Paris goals, because they're considering 2050 as a time horizon. We need to be carbon neutral by 2050 in order to prevent warming beyond that by 2100, and then it'll still continue. And Mark noticed something weird in the tornado plot. That was a good name for that. Which was that they're spending 3 times what on cybersecurity that they're spending on solar. And is that R&D, solar R&D? Or, yeah, so here you have solar is $100 million. Cybersecurity is $300 million. Is that just protect? I mean, this is all supposed to be energy, not cyber.
And it has 1.5 billion for a clean energy demonstration on current and former mine land. I don't know.
I have heard something about that in like last week's State Sustainability Summit. I think they want to incorporate mine land reclamation into energy projects. It could be solar farms.
So you would think that that would be explained in this report, but it's not. Like, if you read the report, they don't explain any of this stuff. They put this chart in there, but it's not really explained. You
And they have
know,
cybersecurity and grid security totaling 1.1 billion.
right.
So it's very bizarre. But I think Barb Pace also had a question.
It just seems to me that we're repeating a negative history. When we go from mining coal to coke ovens, and we're finally getting rid of them, and we're going to bring in something else. Can you explain to this layperson who is not as educated as you, what is so damaging about capturing and making hydrogen, so that I can carry this conversation over intelligently?
Yeah, well, there are folks that know a lot about this, and there could be some long explanations for it. The short version is you can get hydrogen a number of different ways, okay? Hydrogen is you strip it off of some molecule somehow. And so what you hear people talking about doing is stripping it off of methane. So, you know, methane is CH4, right? And so you get 4, you know, hydrogens for 1 carbon atom. And the way that works is they do that with a high temperature steam process, okay? Steam reformed methane is what it's called. And that is something that they can do. But and then so that is not carbon neutral, because you're still using carbon. It's less carbon than what you would get if you were to strip hydrogen from coal or oil or, you know, another hydrocarbon, but it still produces a significant amount of carbon. And so what they're saying is, well, after you get that carbon molecule, which it ends up generally as CO2 as a part of that steam reformation process, is that you put that in a pipe and you shove it underground. And the problem with that part is all the places where they do this, that doesn't work very well. It takes a good bit of energy to actually do that. So there's a huge penalty that's paid in actually needing to burn more fuel just to capture the emissions. And the demonstration projects, they claim that for that to be effective, you have to capture somewhere around 90 to 95% of carbon for it to be worth doing. And all the demonstration projects are coming in where maybe they get 40% of it, or maybe 60. So there's a lot of problems with it. And then what happens to that carbon that's stored underground long term anyhow? There are some risks of, can it leak?
So
Some
it's
of it,
it's like nuclear. Look what we do with nuclear.
It's not like nuclear, but it has its problems of what happens in the storage.
Afterwards, yeah, we dove into that thinking that was going to be it. Now what do we do with these? Are underground. So you saw that truck. Was that a dangerous thing, him driving down the road with those long tubes?
yeah, sure.
Hydrogen?
Hydrogen is highly reactive and explosive.
It should not have been traveling that way. It should have been more protected.
Well, should have. I mean, it depends on how you look at it. There's probably no legal prohibition for them to use the containers that they use to transport those trucks, transport that hydrogen on a truck like that. Now, are the regulations protective? Are there risks? Probably yes. So I haven't looked at the regs, and safety provisions of those tanks. But I saw a second one like that when I came back from Johnstown a month and a half later on Route 22 outside of Murraysville. So it's not like this is only in one place where I've seen these trucks driving around.
So the people who are in power, the people who are in control feel that they can make big buck going this way rather than doing solar and wind. That's what the bottom line is. They're convinced.
The bottom line is if all you know how to do is use a hammer, then you think of ways of reusing that hammer again and
Looks like
again
a
and
wheel.
again.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Oh. So, yeah, another Barbara is making comments in the chat about, that, well, the people talk about hydrogen in all these different colors. So perhaps a moment, to explain them. If you're just using steam reformation of methane to grab the hydrogen, and you're using burning methane to make that heat, to make the steam, that's called gray hydrogen. So that's fully fossil powered hydrogen. And hydrogen is not an energy source. Hydrogen is an energy storage substance. So it's like, you can imagine that tank as like a battery, which if you have the right gadget that uses hydrogen, that can supply the energy. But it's not like hydrogen is the source. Hydrogen is merely a form of storage. Doing carbon capture and sequestration is considered blue hydrogen because it's not as bad as gray hydrogen to the extent that you really can sequester the carbon underground or wherever. And however, as Matt pointed out, it's generally inefficient and expensive and energy intensive. So Barbara was pointing out that it produces more pollution than just if you burn natural gas to get the energy in the first place. There's also, I mean, when you are extracting natural gas, there's leakage, there's well blowouts, there's people who live in the fracking regions having all kinds of health problems, possible cancer clusters, skin, respiratory issues, weird cancers in parts of the body you didn't know you had. It is, and then pink hydrogen is another color, and that's if you use nuclear energy to do steam reformation of methane. So it's sort of nuclear plus methane. Green hydrogen is using, I believe you're separating the hydrogen out of water using renewably produced energy. And to the extent that hydrogen may be necessary for some particularly hard to electrify sectors like aviation or certain industries, if it's green, that's certainly a lot better. Even renewable energy does not come without a cost. You have to mine the materials, you have to make the stuff, you have to try to recycle it at the end of its life. So nothing comes without a cost, and we should be using a lot less energy than we're doing, and we should be creating a lot less plastic crap than we're doing. So Barbara also pointed out the carbon capture process will make a lot of money for business because of 45Q tax credits. So it's being basically favored in many regulations now because people are talking about it in a very idealistic way, but there have not been highly efficient demonstration projects anywhere of carbon capture. And most of any demonstration projects that have been fairly big have been pretty inefficient. So building hydrogen hubs with carbon capture will cost taxpayers a lot, and energy costs will go up because carbon capture will waste so much energy, and while also not helping us achieve the climate goals to the extent that we need to. So yeah, it's a spinning machine that the fossil industry, which owns so many legislators, especially here in Pennsylvania and over in West Virginia, and I think Ohio too, and I'm sure other states, they see CCS as a way to keep themselves in business with their current extractive and damaging business model, where they are allowed to externalize costs, health costs, environmental costs, climate costs, future climate disasters, people living with COPD and cancer or dying of it. And they are internalizing the profits. So this is what we need to figure out. Anyway, I should shut up. Give you back the stage.
Don't shut up, Maren. You guys keep on talking. You're doing great.
Yes, the outdoor component.
It's cold. Because of your comments about the cold, I went down to my raised beds and pulled out some vegetables. So now I'm back inside, but it's refreshingly cold outside today.
Yeah, this is just some of the tomatoes. I still have green ones, and I put a tarp over the bulk of the tomatoes, so in the garden to try to, so if it can't radiate to space, I don't think it'll get quite as cold underneath as it otherwise would, but I don't know. We'll see. I harvested a lot of them and left some to duke it out with the sky.
I wanted to thank everybody for making everything so understandable.
I agree. And being an iron worker's daughter, and poor Matt has heard this story before, I have been asked to leave at holidays for being a bleeding secular humanist. So I know I'm going to get attacked, and I need to speak intelligently at the next family gathering. So I appreciate you giving me some tools to sound like I know what I'm talking about.
Barb,
Yeah.
as a great grandson and son of steelworkers, what I can say is it's time for steel to be made the way it needs to be made in the 21st century. Okay, it's time to stop making steel like it was made in the 18th century or the 19th century. Okay, what that means is you don't need to bake coal anymore to make steel. You can use electric arc furnaces that use iron that is high quality, and you can directly reduce it. The same way that aluminum is made, you can run electricity through it and make steel from it.
Mhm.
And you can do that cheaply. And you can avoid all of this business of baking coal to make coke and so on. And people are already doing this. So this is the thing you can ask. If people give you a hard time, you can ask them, do you want steel making to remain in the Pittsburgh area?
Mhm.
You know, it needs to be made the way steel needs to be made in the 21st century. And that means using electric arc furnaces and avoiding all of this carbon stuff. and don't waste money on building infrastructure on blue hydrogen and CCS, because if you're going to spend money, that is a less effective way to spend money in things that have 30-year lifespans. You know, it's better to spend that money on what we know works, which is renewable energy.
Mhm.
That's what we need to build out. We need to spend our money on renewable energy. The business case is clear, it's rock solid. And so we just need to take the money and not waste it on things that aren't going to help us. We just need to spend the money on things that will help us and that will actually help us prosper. So right now, anyone who's sort of like going kicking and screaming into the future, just like happened in the 1980s, which resulted in, you know, a diaspora of tens of thousands of people leaving the Pittsburgh area because nobody would steer the car away from the cliff in time. You know, people were doing the exact same thing. And to me, it's frightening because, you know, I know what the consequences were growing up during that period of time when everyone had to leave, including myself. So we don't want to do that again. So make the smart choice going forward.
Gonna come with me to my Thanksgiving dinner? I mean,
Sure.
speak-
Absolutely. Zoom makes many things possible these days, Barb.
It's just sad to be 81 years of age and asked to leave because I'm a bleeding secular humanist. I can't even have an intelligent conversation, you know? They
You
won't even
need
do
to
it.
tell people to listen to you because of the wisdom that you have, and that they need to be quiet.
Respect your elders, man.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. It's a great, great time. Thank you. And I'm glad we were indoors because we would have never had all those slides. I mean, they really added. Thank you very, very much.
Benefits, and that I also could spend today dealing with plants instead of renting up the house and yard and porch.
Yeah. And that needed it. Yeah, great presentation, both Mark and Matthew. Thank you. You're
And Cliff too.
gifts.
Cliff, our
Yeah, I
hats
thank
off,
you.
our
Yeah,
hats off to Cliff and the Eyes on Shell people.
Yeah.
They are kicking butt.
yeah.
They really are.
Yeah, that was very impressive. I wish Ken had seen those videos because he was complaining like crazy at our board meeting the other night about that. And he never shows up at the meetings. That's what drives me crazy. Nobody wants to say anything to him about that, but those were great, great photos. Thank God for CMU and their, I assume those were drone shots. It's how they got those shots. Yeah. Well,
They,
thank you.
another thing about social license to operate, which is a great concept that
Gwen.
Marcus,
And Gwen.
and Gwen too. This plant is here. It's going to emit some amount. I don't know if if it might be able to be closed at some point because they're just too egregious, but the degree of documentation of their pollution that is happening now and into the future with Eyes on Shell and Mark's network is going to make it much, much harder to bring in more of that half dozen plants that they want to do. I mean, the industry has always been talking about having 4 or 5 more of these things and in our region. And the second one, thanks to Concerned Ohio River residents and whatever other activists downriver, the plant that was to be built by PTT Global Energy, which is a Taiwanese or Thailand.
Yeah, Thailand.
Sounded right. Thailand, a Thai company. And it is interesting that you have all these foreign companies coming in, like Shell is Dutch, PTTG is Thai, and they aren't having to live with the pollution, which reminds me, well, at any rate, so the one there, which is just in Eastern Ohio, next to the northern panhandle of West Virginia, right across the river from a little town called Moundsville, named for Native American burial mounds that are there. That plant keeps having problems, like the financing has been very difficult, and I don't know if the permitting is being difficult, but because I think Ohio's at least as bad as Pennsylvania is in terms of that kind of industrial permitting. But they're having trouble getting that plant off the ground. I mean, it isn't built yet. They're still in these planning stages. But the strength of the public record and the public discourse about the discord that we're in with industry will really help to prevent other plants from coming in, because when they are considering a place, what they did here was they really snuck in. They were talking to the Potter Township supervisors behind closed doors. Who knows how much cajoling and threatening they did to get them to approve that. And those supervisors weren't particularly educated. I didn't have the impression when we testified up there. And they already had their mind made up before people even came in to try to give community input. So it is, it will be a great testament. Even if this plant continues operating for a while, it will be a terrific testament to the hard work of these monitoring networks. If we can prevent other cracker plants from coming into our region.
So we need to send our information to these people who want to do this hydrogen and let them see what we're doing, because they're not going to want us on their ass like that.
That's what a lot of, like, there were these tours that something last week was the Global Ministerial on Clean Energy Action Forum, and a whole series of events which Breathe really spearheaded, which I called alt ministerial. The climate justice, clean energy justice convergence included tours of people who are living with fracking, people who are living with Clairton Coke Works, what's going on with this huge facility up in Beaver. And so, and a lot of people went on that, like Department of Energy people were on those tours. And that, I think was very important, because they could see, and, you know, all these people who are getting cancer and stuff were being talked about when they visited frackland tours, were just, you know, just part of it. And they had midstream, which I guess was compressor stations and pipelines and stuff. And they had a steel tour and a petrochemical tour. So I think those were very powerful tools, because some of the right people went on them. So that was Breathe really facilitated that. They found and funneled money to support the things that had costs and helped make a lot of really good things happen.
Carbon sequestration means that old polluting facilities will keep operating at the expense of the communities who presently live around them. Carbon sequestration equals injustice. It is an equal sign in direct proportion to the lack of decarbonization. It presents an injustice. And so just, I've been trying to get that into my own brain, just like carbon capture equals injustice. Now, there are probably ways you can tease that out about, like, well, what is the greater injustice around the global community versus the local community? But I think that we have to transcend, we have to like do find a third way so that injustice is not propagated by these brand new solutions and the billions of dollars and the limited amount of hours in the day that we have for all of humanity to be working feverishly at this issue. I think that, you know, we kind of have highlighted, at least I've seen that there's lots of money floating around just sitting. What we're lacking is obviously the political will to move that money, but also I think we're getting to a point where we're just not going to have enough people hours in the day to build the stuff that we need to with the people who are currently trained to accomplish those tasks. And so we're approaching a whole different level of like, what are you doing with every hour of your day? Are you building the new infrastructure and new economy, or are you helping to build infrastructure and money for people who are going backwards like Shell?
Yeah, a metaphor that springs to mind is often, if anyone has read or seen the films of the Hunger Games, in which
Yes.
District 13 is this oppressed coal colony, and it's basically this region. It's the rich people off in District 1 are happily living their fancy lives, and this region has nearly basically slave labor to mine coal and
Mining colony.
yeah, it's a mining colony. And so getting that point across by taking people into affected communities is a really good thing. And there are Frackland tours that her name is
Lois
Lois.
Bjornson.
Oh,
Yeah,
Bjorn-
Lois Bjornson.
has been running for a while, which she invites policymakers on, because these people, if they don't see it, it's not going to be a problem. Just as climate damage, we're here in Pittsburgh and we might get a big storm and some extra flooding and this and that, but we're not a coastal community. We're not a low-lying country. We're not an island country. And we're not a desertification. There must be an adjective version of that. Anyway, we're not in danger of becoming a desert or any of that. We have kind of a lot of leeway, and it can be hard for people to really conceive of that unless they're paying attention to news and seeing what just happened in Florida and da 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 da.
Yeah, an idea desert. Seriously.
So I should note that I mentioned before that Mark has some wonderful short videos that are, I'm assuming, kind of teasers out of the world of inversion, but I might be wrong.
No. These are special order while we've been talking.
Oh boy, that's
Yep.
so cool.
I took Matt's slogan and I updated the graphic. There you go, Matt.
There it is, right there. Yep.
Yep. And then I realized I had other assets
You
that I
got to
could
put
use.
Rich Fitzgerald's picture on there and Governor Wolf.
Oh,
Oh, it's getting really complicated. I have one more though, because I realized I had material that I hadn't built in yet, which is this. This one. I just went bonkers with this one.
Beautiful, Mark.
Yeah. Right on target. Yeah, there's
Just-
some new movie called Shell. It was about this woman, and she's a little shell, and it's made waves. It's been in all the theaters. But the
Oh,
voice,
Marcel the shell with shoes on.
yes,
Oh.
yes,
Yes, that is a very different shell.
yes. Yeah,
That
very
is a
clever.
seashell.
Yeah,
Cute. Anyway, thanks for laughing with me.
yeah. And thank you for the creativity. I feel very informed, and I will go bravely into Thanksgiving.
Okay, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Report-
Thank you. Thank you for this afternoon.
So
Great.
thank you again. And Michael points out that could easily go viral, Mark. Let's spread it out. Let's spread
Yes.
it around.
Yeah, Matt, can I release the gas one too? Just do I have your permission? Because you gave the taglines.
Please.
Yeah.
Please
Do you
do.
want me to credit you with the tagline or just run with it? Oh,
Where we talked about.
it froze. I
Just
didn't hear
what-
I didn't hear the answer.
Just run with it. Run with it. Run,
Run,
do it.
run.
Yeah, I'll have
Run.
at
Make
least
it
one of them
happen.
up on Twitter tonight.
Okay, great.
You can credit me or not. It doesn't matter.
right.
If people use it, I will get a good laugh.
Satisfied, right? Yeah.
So Barbara has also a closing comment. Now fix Harrisburg. Tell your legislators that the rules that allow a few leaders in Harrisburg to control which bills come to the floor for a vote. Tell the legislators that bills that have bipartisan support should move out of committee to the floor for a vote and not be buried. And we did an organization, well, actually Fair Districts PA, which did a lot of work on our redistricting, but that work is and things did improve. We no longer have Goofy kicking Pluto. Or Pluto kicking Goofy or whatever, Mickey kicking Donald. I don't know. This is Donald, I'd like to kick. Their things are better there for the next 10 years than they were before, but now they have an initiative called Fix Harrisburg. So I don't know if it's fixharrisburg.com or .org. We did have Doug Webster come from that organization to talk to us at one of our summertime salons. So I was going to say thank you so much, Matt, but I think he just vanished. I don't-
Wind, yeah.
Yeah, so, but thank you in absentia, Matt.
Yeah.
And as well as Cliff and Mark, for a really awesome program today. And we'll be continuing with air on November 12th. And I hope to see you there.
Thank you, thank you. Go have something warm to drink. You've got to have your sweet
Oh, I
could be
gotta go get
freezing.
more plant stuff because it's getting cold. So I'll bring in these 20 pounds of tomatoes and we'll cover some
Good
things up.
night, everybody. Thank you again for the gift of
Good
your.
night all. Yep, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.